I think it's good. Alright. Comments will appear here. That's what I'm talking about.
Baby. We're live, baby. We're live. We live, baby. We live.
I'm actually just doing this right now.
Oh, man. It's got 40,000, 2,000 people who are just about to watch. Alright, let me know when you're ready, Kalam.
Guys, thanks for it. You introduce me, you must sit down and do it.
Right, stand up, I've lost weight.
You know
what I mean? I used to have this little, what we call
that was the summer, bro.
Right, so, okay, it's all good.
Are we ready?
Yep.
Alright, so, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad. First of all, thank you for coming. I know this event was a short notice. It was, literally planned very quickly. I asked you 10 days ago, can you do it? I kind of just put this kind of route on meetup. I wasn't sure if Mufti was going to come, but alhamdulillah, you saved my bestie.
There you go. Don't worry about it.
So, a lot of people have questions about Islam these days, yeah? And we have got inadequate people representing us. A lot of people see the people with the big beards, the toppies on, even though I've got a toppy on today and stuff. That's a hat, by the way, or kufi in America. And they think, oh, this person knows about Islam. We speak to them. And these kind of holy, righteous warriors or imams, they kind of give this kind of premeditated speeches. And some of the questions that people have are a lot deeper. And one of the things I like about Mufti, who I'm about to introduce, he's a British-born scholar, so he's from this country. He understands the society. It's not just subcontinent, Pakistani, Indo-Pakistan, Bangladeshi Islam, or Salafi kind of Arabian Islam. One of the great things that we've had in the Muslim tradition before is people who are deep thinkers. And people who weren't afraid to cause a bit of, I shouldn't say trouble, but people who weren't afraid to engage with dialogue. Ask those hard questions. Often within the Islamic tradition, as Hamza Yusuf has said before, there's a diverse plethora of views. We don't hear those views. We are expected to believe one thing, and to quote Mufti, people guilt trip you. If you don't believe that, you're Kafir, and you're not a real Muslim, or they'll label you. To be honest with you, we don't deal with labels. We don't care about labels. We deal with facts, and we deal with truth. And we try to be as inclusive to everyone. So, we come with the love. If you're Muslim, non-Muslim, and there's a lot of non-Muslims in the audience, and thank you all for coming. It's really nice to see you. There's people from the Shia community, Bayt al-Ghadir. Shout out to you guys. There's... Yeah. And we're going to keep this like an informal event.
Are you saying that Shias are not Muslims?
No, I'm saying they're brothers and sisters. Trust me, I love my Shia brothers. Yeah.
Silently saying, implicitly.
No, I'm the one that promotes Shias are Muslims. There's anyone. So, anyway, you're not supposed to interrupt what I'm speaking. How dare you, woman? So, we're going to keep it informal. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Mufti. Mufti Abu Layth is one of the greatest. I don't like using the word scholar, but it's overused. But he's a scholar. He's a real scholar. He studied.
Give me that. Huh?
Let me do it. I'm blacklisted now as well. He studied classical Arabic Islamic studies as a teenager. He went to Damascus, Syria in the 90s. Is that right?
In the 90s, late 90s. Yeah,
late 90s. He was inspired by one of my icons, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, Hanson from America. He promotes the Maliki madhab, and he's one of the foremost proponents in the UK. He's got a host of ijazas from a number of sheikhs, and very big sheikhs, including from the Grand Qarawiyyin, Sheikh Abdul Ghani Dhikr, Sheikh Abdul Hani al-Dhikr.
There is a section on Facebook, an about section.
So I'm going to skip that. But
stuff.
basically, what I'm trying to tell you is he's got a lot of credentials. And here's the thing, you might see him and you might think, oh, he hasn't got, like I said, a big beard and so. Oh, that's a Maliki beard, right?
I've got a beard.
That's
This is a beard. This is not classed as a beard. This is a beard, isn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, I'm waffling. So I'm going to cut that. I'm Saracen 786. Those of you who don't know, get to know. We're bringing the love. We're bringing the real spirit of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam into this UK. We're doing events. If you're on Meetup, check out British Muslim Discussion and Events. So what we're going to do, we're going to have just an open question and answer and stuff. And this was inspired by the Talib Collective in America, where people just had these discussions. And it's so nice to have some women here as well, because we don't hear your voices. So I'm going to let the women ask the question. We're gentlemen, right? So we have that old British tradition of ladies first. Not to put you on the spot, ladies, but before actually, sorry. I'm the first person to ask the question because I saw it. So the first question, I know a lot of you guys have. This is a question I've got a lot.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is Nandos halal?
Is Nandos halal? The first question is Nandos halal. Is that a real question?
We need to know this.
Okay. It depends on the Nandos, I take it. So, so there you go, guys. Just ask your local Nandos if they're halal or not. That should answer the question. So, Bismillah, let's begin this in Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-Mustafa wa ala ibadihi alladhina irtada wa man bihudahum ihtada wa bi athari ahli al-Madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. So, salamullahi ala al-qawm, ahlan wa sahlan, people. Take it away, man.
Ladies, have you got any questions first? Just raise your hands if you're a lady and you've got a question. Yes, please.
I want to ask, we know from the Hadith that something which we don't know from the Quran, for instance, not praying during Sundays. So what if we're asked at the day
Not praying during Sundays, did you say?
Not praying on certain days.
Oh, certain days, okay.
So what if we're asked on the Day of Judgment that, I told you in the Quran, I told you to pray, and just because of some hadith which you don't even know 100% if it's true or not, you decided not to pray a quarter of the month for your whole life, every month. What if we're held to account for this?
Good question.
Okay. It's a good question. We're talking about things like the menstrual cycle and stuff like this. Okay. Generally, the Islamic sources teach that a woman doesn't pray during the menstrual cycle. I think just to briefly explain, I think this has sometimes been misrepresented. It's represented through culture sometimes as though the woman is impure. That's not the understanding through the Quran or the Sunnah. The understanding through I suppose in the Quran, there isn't too much really reference to this in general, but through the Sunnah, you understand that the Prophet, through general ahadith, teaches that these things are like sadaqatullah. They are like a token of like gratitude from Allah to certain people at certain times. So in this case, women. There's other tokens of these kind of dispensations for people that are travelers or other things. And Allah has given you His charity in saying that, look, it's a benevolent way of saying you don't need to do this right now. Not that you are impure or dirty or you can't do this. Now the question comes, what if you still wanted to do it? Then the hadith teaches you that, look, when Allah gives you something as a charity, accept it gracefully. It's like somebody saying you don't need to work, you don't need to come in on this day. It's from Allah, it's an act of worship in essence. So to just take it with grace, not as a kind of, it's not to put anybody down. That's as far as the background, just to correct that, because this is often taught sometimes as though it's an impurity, as though it's like something disgusting, and so it doesn't really teach that in the Sunnah that is established. In terms of, well, if you follow this understanding and now you don't pray for a certain amount of time, And would you be accountable if that was false? Let's just say this was misrepresented, this whole hadith, and now on the Day of Judgment, you find out, well, you've missed certain salah. Look, ibadat and worship don't give Allah anything. Our worship don't benefit Allah in the least. This is something that Allah has set about so people can engage in some form of remembrance. People like Ibn Rushd, the great Muslim scholar from Muslim Spain, highlights in his book that really what Allah would have wanted is people to ponder over Him, to reflect, to think. His creation, and that was the greatest understanding. He says that's the kind of wisdom behind humans, that they can ponder and reflect over God, but God knew that most people may not fall into that deep thinking category. So therefore, the spectrum was set in such a way that worship is something everybody can do. It's set at certain times, everybody can participate, and those who can rise above and ponder and reflect will do so. So I don't think there's any guilt or anything like to behave like in a, not that this is, but to behave in almost like an OCD way and thinking, look, well, what if I got this wrong? Oh my God, God's going to be like this and God's going to be like... I think you just need to relax. Allah doesn't, need... You're only trying to follow the deen, in essence. You're not doing this like, hey, I'm cutting corners or I'm doing something. You're only doing what has come to you. It's been transmitted and it's not of any ultimate gain to God. So I wouldn't say that anybody needs to stress that or sweat that or worry about it or think about it, that Allah's going to,
Can I just ask you about, you mentioned before on Monday nights, Muftis, about people who guilt trip others. And I think can you just expand on that? Because I think we've all experienced it, right? People, if you don't do this, you're going to the hellfire and stuff. If you don't have non-Muslim friends, you're going to the hellfire.
Yes. So this guilt tripping thing is done a lot, unfortunately. So people have this understanding that they use it as a kind of card. So they're gonna, if you disagree with them, it's a method of control. It's to exert control on people. So how do I get you to agree with me? Well, I'll try to maybe argue something. What if you overcome my argumentation? Then I'll just guilt trip you. I'll be like, on the Day of Judgment, watch what happens to you. This kind of thing, it is completely not from the life of the Prophet. So you see, people came to the Prophet, they said certain things. The Prophet engaged with them in discussion where sometimes they were very harsh to the Prophet. The Prophet just said, fine. There was a person who... there's riwayat where somebody comes to the Prophet and says, look, what is this about worship? Okay, there's 5 prayers. I'm going to pray those obligatory things. I'm not going to pray anything else. I'm not going to fast anything else. Okay, I'll do what you're saying, but I'm not doing anything other than that. The Prophet could have said, well, watch on the Day of Judgment then. He could have said, well, watch. He just said, fine. He said and in fact, when he went off, the Prophet said that وَأَبِيهِ, or in some versions, وَرَبِّ الْكَعْبَةِ, or wallahi, like taking an oath saying that لَقَدْ أَفْلَحْ إِن صَدَقْ. If he just does that, he is successful. And there's other narrations where some person came and said, look, I can't even offer certain prayers. I'm only going to pray this, not even the 5 prayers. And the Prophet never... the Prophet ﷺ's approach was one of trying to bring ease to people. He just said, okay. And they say in time to come, that person was actually, in years, he was very steadfast with his prayers, although at that point he wasn't. And I think that is this guilt-tripping thing, it's very cultish. It's like a cultish, cult-like behavior. This, you better do what I'm doing or watch. And this thing that automatically, when you disagree with something, you must be following desires. This is part of this guilt trip thing. That, what you're doing is following desires. I've said to people, that's absurd that you're following desires. Desires, this ain't desires. Somebody saying, I don't want to pray like that, I want to pray like this, is not desires. That person who interprets that as desires, I think they're pretty kind of sheltered in their lifestyle. That's not desires. So yeah, this is so that's what I would say. I would say people start guilt tripping, alarm bell should be ringing, and that's it.
Ladies, have you got any other ladies got a question, or can I, if you want to think about it? You got 10 seconds. Right.
10 seconds. Countdown.
Yeah, go on, please.
Yeah.
Recently you said that some scholars have disputed there was something that was water, whether the actual concept actually exists.
Yeah.
So from what I was getting from what you were saying, that water actually doesn't exist, most of the hadiths or if
Yeah.
So my question is, in Islam,
Why are you a kafir for saying that?
where does it, outside of Allah's book, where does the certainty lie? Now, I know that you're a Maliki and you believe that it's the consensus of the people in Medina and what they believe that will be taken as certain. But from the hadiths, where is the certainty if there's no mutawatir?
You see, the thing to understand, this mutawatir.
Can you explain that?
Okay, the question is that where does the certainty lie in Islam beyond the Quran, beyond the Quranic scripture? Because hadith, I've said, hadith are generally just khabru ahad, that they are transmitted through isolated people or... Now, you see, there's this discussion of mutawatir. Mutawatir means that something that is so ubiquitously known, is so widespread, it has been mass transmitted, that so many people have transmitted this, that that could they all just be co-conspiring? That's what mutawatir is in essence about. This
and what's ahad? Sorry.
And khabru ahad is normal. Like if somebody tells you something, it's not mass transmitted. It's just through certain people. It could be a few people, a handful of people, or certain. Like if
even one person.
Yeah, like let's just say now, the fact I'm doing an event here today, this isn't mass trans. It could have just been a hoax. It could have been. It's not like impossible. But if somebody said, does China exist? Many people here probably haven't been to China. Yet they would deem it impossible that was a lie. That the whole history and everybody got together to concoct this story of Zhonghua, of China, just so you guys could be fooled by it. And what would the objective be? It doesn't add up. So it's almost pretty certain that China does exist.
Yeah.
Right? So now, what's interesting is this mutawatir was never the discussion of hadith. So if you go through hadith developmental studies like usul hadith, mutawatir is never brought into the books of hadith as a discussion, really up until Ibn Salah's time, which is, we're talking almost 600-700 years after the Prophet. Wow. So the early people who start documenting, not who document hadith, but who start writing about the science of hadith, because obviously documenting hadith is a different thing, but people like Qadi Abu Muhammad al-Ram Hurmuzi, who writes one of the first books, or people after him, like people like Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. Khatib al-Baghdadi does have a brief, he touches on something just to really have a discussion on how hadith is transmitted. He does highlight a distinction, but he doesn't speak about mutawatir like this, the way we understand it today. He says that how is knowledge transmitted, and he has a discussion on, well, there's a concept of something being mass transmitted, and then there's isolated transmission, and then he goes into hadith. Ibn Salah really changes the whole hadith studies game when he comes. And he's the person, there's like I don't know, I mean, this is without a value judgment, but there's like a Copernican revolution within hadith studies. He changes everything. After him, hadith studies is always dependent on him, Ibn Salah. He introduces this concept of mutawatir. Ironically, he actually begins by saying, by the way, the discussion of mutawatir as is understood by theologians, because mutawatir was originally the discussion of theologians and of usulul fiqh people, because it was about saying, how do we know what we know? So they said, what do we believe in? We will only believe in matters that are purely established by Islam. This was their concept. Anything that's got some doubt, we won't take it in. Like we can benefit from it, but we're not going to take it as an established fact. So they came up with this discussion of mutawatir, and people in fiqh as well, because in some fiqhi madhabs, like they said, well, if you deny certain rulings, are you a kafir? And they said, well, no, because these rulings are not proven through mutawatir. And there's this discussion of, do normal hadith give certainty, give yufidul ilm is the Arabic term. And almost all of the usuliyin and scholars, theologians said no. They said they're enough to act by, like the lady had asked that, look, if there was, there's a hadith saying you don't need to pray, but how do we know? Maybe it's wrong. Maybe there's a 1% chance. So the scholars address this by saying, look, yufidul amal, not ilm. That you can act by it, it's enough to, because it's religion at the end of the day, you're going by religion, and it's not something that's going to benefit Allah. But it's not a matter of belief like that. Yes, you could say, I believe. Like, you see, belief as well is a loosely used term. Like, I could say, look, I believe we don't need to pray on this day. But that's not creed. Creed is like theology. We believe God is like this. We believe this is like this. These things, the theologian said, we don't take khabru ahadin, we take mutawatir transmissions. This centuries later crept into hadith studies. Then people like Ibn Hajar, may Allah bless him, he really cemented this game of mutawatir. And I suppose he had a lot invested. He was a major muhaddith, and his works for us as Muslims are, we are indebted to him for serving like a lifetime of work to things like Sahih Bukhari and all these books of hadith. But along the way, he brought in certain baggage. A part of it was this kind of mutawatir game that he really hammers in. And then after him, everybody kind of starts boasting this mutawatir. This is on a par with the fuqaha. I don't know if you know fuqaha, the jurists, Muslim scholars. Their myth of ijma' is on a par with the muhaddithin's almost myth of the mutawatir. And hence Imam Shatibi says in his Muwafaqat that, look, this, and I shared that on YouTube recently, you can just find it's a 2-minute clip, where he says in his Muwafaqat that this discussion of mutawatir is almost a hypothetical discussion, which really is in reality quite fruitless. He says that. And he says if you find the Quran ever clashing with hadith, it's always the Quran is given preference. He says that. So I shared that recently on YouTube. But yes, so I hope that.
Certainty then? How do we get?
So certainty, you see, when we say we need certainty in life, certainty is to do with things like belief concepts, like if we want to use like faith concept. But once again, faith, ironically, is always something which there is no utter certainty about. There's a certain level we can get to, and that's it. If we're going to be honest with ourselves. People say, can you prove God exists? You can't prove God exists, like that kind of proof. Prove meaning to literally, empirically prove. You can give logical proofs. That is another usage of the word proof. It's a looser usage. And that's true. You could argue. I think equally you couldn't disprove God's existence, as Freud said. But you couldn't prove it either. But then it wouldn't be faith. It would just be proof. Like, the fact that... So I think the whole purpose of faith is having good enough to go by, as opposed to this concrete, like this is solid. I mean, although that could be argued from a certain quantum physics and things like that, but the point is, perceptually, this is solid. Wanting faith to be like that would not be faith then it would just be science.
It's like certainty beyond reasonable doubt.
I wouldn't use it like that, but I would say, like good enough certainty to get by. And like it's good enough for, like depends what we're talking about once again. If we're talking about practices in Islam, like rituals, look, rituals at the end of the day are not, there's something, it's not really what Islam was about. Like if Islam was about rituals, in essence, then all and civilizations would have had the same rituals. Laws, Islam was never really about laws. These things were there, but these were secondary purposes of Islam. The primary purpose was a connection between the creator and the creation. That was it. I've used the term that laws and sharia, these things were a social remedy. There was a social remedy theory, that there was fluidity. Like it came to react and give a remedy for the social problems of its time. Hence, different people had different social remedies. Different prophets had different shari'ahs. Allah says, لِكُلٍّ جَعَلْنَا that شَرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. We gave a different sharia and a methodology to different prophets. So it couldn't have been, and I think this is part of the problem, that we've got a deification of sharia. We've given the laws godlike status. The Quran is sacred as a vehicle, but the message within it, depending what the message is, depending on what it's talking about, the purpose of it is that it goes with each day and age. And a good example is like when Allah speaks about self-defense for the Muslims. That Allah says that وَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ, and prepare for yourselves a defense from being attacked and things like this. وَمِن رِبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ, from these kind of forts of horses. Prepare horses and things like this. Nobody today would say we should go about preparing horses.
Some people would.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, I take that back. Most, with the caveat that most sane people would not today say that we need to prepare horses. They would say military strength of the age. So in the same way, they wouldn't say that that verse is rejected. They would say the message of the verse is still there. But the delivery reflects your day and age. It's a social remedy for your age. But yeah.
Have we got any questions on hudud? Because I think it will be
Hudud?
Has anyone got any questions on hudud? Because I think, yeah, go on, bro.
My question is, early Muslim scholars collectively believed in certain tenets of belief, like the moon splitting in half, the Dajjal. Why should we reject their views when they were closer to the Prophet Muhammad generation and believe modern and secular views?
I swear that's not hudud, bro. But I'll take it anyway.
So the question is that people who've espoused the belief of things like the splitting of the moon and the Dajjal, the Antichrist, yeah? People who've espoused these beliefs previously and historically, which they have, unquestionably, let's say 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, why are we critical of these views today when they were closer to the Prophet than us? That is, I think from that angle, it's a very good question. That is a very good question. And I agree with you. I think before zooming into that question, I want to just briefly give a backdrop and clarify something. You see, today when we say scholars, ulama, we have common, and even scholars do this, they don't misrepresent it necessarily, but the public sometimes misinfer. Because to become a scholar, on average 6 to 8 years of training. Let's say you study theology, law, jurisprudence, all these things, arts, these kind of technical sciences. People have a naivety to like scholars to create, treat them or to perceive them like onto professors. That the way we think of professors today, here's a professor, he studied this many years. Scholars are like Muslim professors. They're not. Scholars are Muslim priests. There's a big difference. You see, this mind of thinking critically or evaluating things, this kind of academic mind, is not the kind of backdrop or the drive within these madrasas or any kind of religious institutes at all. And there's a lot more that influences the game. So yes, it's true that these beliefs, now just going back to that question, have been coming along for a long time, but they've been critiqued. When they've been critiqued, people have looked at what drove these beliefs. Do we believe that this came from the Prophet? So the splitting of the moon, for example, most scholars have put into their books as principles. Now this is in classical scholars, people like Ibn Hazm, Ibn Jawzi, and all these hadith scholars have put in their books that when a hadith is valid, it must still meet 3 criteria. That it cannot go against reason. They actually write this in their books that مَا لَمْ يُبَايِنَ الْمَعْقُولِ, it cannot go against reason. وَلَمْ يُخَالِفِ الْمَنْقُولِ, it cannot go against established sources. وَلَمْ يُنَاقِضِ الْأُصُولِ, it cannot uproot established principles in Islam. Now, then there's another question. Why did these scholars not live up to their criteria in allowing certain beliefs? That's a different discussion. And that involves a lot of sectarian warfare. Sometimes things people did for positions of power, for power politics, to kind of put down other groups, to kind of put themselves forward. They energized certain debates based on sectarian warfare, as opposed to... So the moment a sect said something, right, that they became slightly known for, people, they let the hounds of hell unleash them on that issue. A good example is like mut'ah, being, from the Shia community. This was not a Shia mas'ala. This is a mas'ala of fiqh. It's a mas'ala of jurisprudence. It has nothing to do with sectarianism. But the moment it became affiliated with a particular group, like today, the 3 talaq mas'ala, it's not invented by the Salafis, but the moment it became championed by them, all hell is unleashed on it. So this becomes the nature of debate. So just because some groups sometimes started to mock certain aspects and say, oh, so you guys believe this. So the backlash became to reinforce that belief. So, this thing of the moon splitting, people have said that, look, it does clash with reason, it does clash with the laws of nature. So what did this mean? Like people like Ibn Ashur, he looks at this and he says, and I've explained this, it's on YouTube, in much more detail. He says, look, some of the narrations describe it as an eclipse. In fact, one from Ibn Abbas says, Kusifat al-Qamar, that the moon was eclipsed.
Wow.
And he says that, look, that this thing, that they were saying to the Prophet at the time, and it happened. So it served that purpose of a miracle. Otherwise, what was the purpose? When you ask people, what is the purpose of these miracles? They say, oh, it's to reinforce the belief of the believers. It's to establish that the Prophet is truthful. You think, well, that doesn't make any sense, because the Prophet faced incredible challenges in Mecca for 13 years when all they asked him was, show us a sign. And then when he does show them this sign, it's in Medina where everybody's a believer. Like, what was the purpose of that? Because that's just preaching to the converted. Like, the people there are already Muslim. Now you could say there's 1-2 non-Muslims, fair enough. But majority of the people in Medina, where this happened by Mount Uhud, they were already Muslim. So in Mecca, in the Quran, Allah quotes them saying, the disbelievers saying, hey, make a garden pop up for us here, make a spring come out, make an angel come down, make this happen, make that happen. And Allah's mocking them, saying, are they insane? Tell them, innama ana bashar, I'm just a human like you. Yuha ilay, revelation comes to me, that's all. So why would it make sense that if Allah was going to do it anyway, well then why not just do it there and just get everybody to believe? Like, what would be the purpose? So this is why it's not about perception. I'm not denying whether people perceived certain things. Maybe they did. But what was the reality behind it? The actual phenomenological reality. It wasn't that the moon actually split, because that would have been a global phenomenon. But it was just the fact that to these people, they saw it, and it just coincided with them some people challenging the Prophet, and it just coincided, and it was like a miracle. So for some people, it served it strengthened their faith. For others, it was, maybe they didn't believe, and it was just interesting. That's it. The Dajjal thing as well, look, I've gone into much depth. I've got a video on YouTube called A Prelude to why the second coming of Jesus is problematic in Islam. And I've called it a prelude because it's an intro, because I'm going to do my whole detailed course on it, which will be several hours, but this is about 2 hours long. In it, I give a lot of my thinking, the reasoning, the problems with this devil child that's going to come. How this devil child concept existed in Greco-Roman thought, in other neighboring civilizations. How there's so much ittirab, clashes about this this kind of devil child, this antichrist within Islam.
We talk about Dajjal.
Dajjal, right? The Masih ad-Dajjal, the antichrist. That even like some narrations say it was in the Prophet's time there was this Jewish person called Safiyyah ibn Sayyad. He was the Dajjal.
Blame the Jews.
And this is another interesting one because he then becomes Muslim.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is he had this one eye that was problematic. And so people were saying he's the Dajjal. And the Prophet said, according to this hadith, the Prophet says, well, don't worry, if he is, I'm here. Ana hajijuhu. I will argue with him. See, look, it's interesting. Ana hajijuhu. Now, the Prophet doesn't say, don't worry, Jesus will come and he will save everything. He doesn't mention anything about this. And then people say, but that clashed as well with the understanding that didn't the Prophet say in another hadith that the Dajjal can't come into Medina? And it's interesting that there's so much clash between this concept of a Dajjal.
Mufti, is that the little kid that the Prophet and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu
Yeah,
were hiding behind a bush and they didn't know
and
that?
I really find this blasphemous that they say that the Prophet was sneak up behind and he tried to spy on this young, I think maybe at that time he might have been a teenager, this boy, to see is he the Dajjal or not. And then the Prophet goes up to him and he's sleeping, and then his mother says, hey, look, there's Muhammad, and he wakes up. And then the Prophet says, oh, if she hadn't woken him up today, I would have ascertained whether he was the Dajjal. And then the Prophet says, okay, what have I got in my mind? And he guesses half of it, he doesn't guess the full of it. And then the Prophet says, okay. And the Prophet says, do you bear witness that I'm the messenger of God? And he says, yes. You see, this was interesting because it brings apostasy into it. Because he says, yes, first. And then, okay. Then he says to the Prophet, now do you bear witness that I'm also a messenger? So by saying that, he would have technically apostated. So the Prophet says, no, I don't accept you as a messenger. He doesn't say, watch, now you've had it. Now I've got you. You see, so it's interesting that these things clash. But there's a huge, I've asked, what is the purpose behind this demon child that's going to come? Why would God test people in such a way that, because all people ask for in faith is proof. Like people say, look, if there's a God, show me a sign. This is what people say, yeah. So now along comes somebody who can show all these divine signs. For once, but he's the demon child. He's the Dajjal. So if you follow him now, you've had it. But that's like saying, look, okay, now I'm about to present to you concrete evidence, which will convince you. But should you follow that concrete evidence, then watch. But that's like, why are you playing these games? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would you do that? Because obviously we're going to go with concrete evidence. That's like, if somebody's showing you evidence, you're going to follow it.
And they're in hadiths. These are hadiths, aren't
And these hadiths, this thing about first of all, the Dajjal thing I've explained, that look, the word Dajjal comes in different contexts. The word itself just means imposter. In some hadith, it can just be referring to the devil in saying the Dajjal, the imposter who deceives. That's because it means the deceiver. So I've said that, look, in some hadith, they may be sahih, and this is simply referring to the devil. It's not like something speaking about this antichrist. That's your imposition on this wording. In some hadith, like there's a hadith which I find interesting, that the Prophet said that there were no prophets except they warned their people of the great trial of this great deception, of the great deceiving. Now, of this great Dajjal, this deceiving. Now, I've thought, look, one way to understand that is, this is the Antichrist. But then if you think about it, every prophet came and warned his people. But when Jesus comes, the hadith says that by the presence of Jesus, he will melt like salt. So that's a bit of an anticlimax, like this everybody's so frightened of this thing. Now, the moment Jesus comes, he just melts. So you think, is that it? Or I've said, look, what is interesting, and I'm not saying you have to follow this, I've just found it interesting that we are embarking upon a time where reality is becoming deceiving, where the virtual is becoming more real than the actual. And now our online lives, like I read something that said, 10 years ago, people went online for a break. from reality. Now they go offline for a break. Like people say, okay, I'm deactivating Facebook, I've got to take a break.
Stress.
And people's Facebook and social media lives have become their real lives. And this is just the beginning. I wonder what it will be like in 10 years, in 20 years' time. Right now even, people's online lives matter more than their real life lives. Like as long as online I'm okay. I think we might be embarking on an age, which I think is very soon, where it's not just like right now, let's say I've got a profile online called Mufti Abu Layth. That profile has a certain character to it, a person, let's just say.
Blacklisted.
It's blacklisted, it's borderline, apostate or whatever. But let's say now, I think in a few years to come, people will start having almost like avatar profiles that are not even them. Maybe not even their gender. Maybe not even their race. Like who they then build up and live. I think we're not far away from things like that.
It's already started happening. There's a thing online called Second Life.
Okay, Second Life.
Literally, that's people will get drawn in by it, they don't come back out.
Yeah, so I think
Your prophecy has come true.
No, but I think this, and I find that we will, like soon the lines will blur.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean these are just my thoughts that it's interesting. I'm not saying that hadith had to mean that, that's just my thinking. Take it, leave it, it's nothing.
We're conscious of time, we've got
Yes,
about an hour left. Can I
Right,
just
people.
ask people to raise their hands if they've got a question? Okay. So I've always wanted to do this because it's on question time. The brother at the back who's got a question. Oh, it's the sister. I had to have a real gentleman.
Stone
so
him.
I'm going to let the sister, the real sister, speak.
Alaikum salam. Okay, I can only apologise and give some, discount vouchers for counselling. Oh, that one. No, I'm just joking. Which one?
It talks about, he says that peace be upon the day that...
Oh, Yoma Walittu wa Yoma Amutu. Yeah.
So, what's your take on that? Because isn't that pretty clear that when he says peace be upon the day that I will return, that shows
That I will return. Where does it say I will return? Sorry?
The day that I'm raised.
Oh, raised, yeah, that's it.
Oh.
Yawma ub'athu hayyan. But it says the day I will be resurrected, like as in from yub'ath is like from the dead, isn't it? That I will be, and it's talking about the day of judgment. So peace be upon me the day I was born and the day I shall die. Or amut, and then it mentions that that the day I will be raised from the dead. So it doesn't. There is no clear verse at all in the Quran about the second coming. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a debate on this.
The fact that it's even highlighted,
Yeah.
say it for other prophets, so doesn't it show...
Actually, in the same surah, it says exactly the same thing for Yahya alayhi salam.
Does
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does say about other prophets, but yeah, sorry, carry on. Was there more to the question? Or
Yeah, I was just thinking isn't that... I was thinking that was true.
I had the same question. That's a really good, because that's the thing that we're guilt tripped with, and we are literally.
I don't
guilt-tripped.
really know what the big deal with this thing about Jesus is. I've become like now the the expert on
But you're not the only
on
one.
Jesus Christ.
Sheikh
No.
Atabek says the same thing. Sheikh Atabek
Okay, I
has.
didn't know that he'd come out openly and said that. Has he openly said that?
I know there's a few other scholars that have said
But
this.
what's happened is this, for some reason, has really disturbed people that Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, is not going to come back. I've said that, look, when we believe in these kind of things, that why would we... It's a different discussion about, let's look into the evidences. That's a different... Because people say this is transmitted by so many companions. I've highlighted that 80% of all these transmissions come just through Abu Hurairah. And no major companion transmits this. You know, like people said, oh, so many companions have transmitted this. I've said, where's Abu Bakr, where's Umar, where's Uthman, where's Ali, where are all these great companions, Aisha, the other wives of the Prophet, where are these people? If I name some of the companions like Nawas ibn Sam'an, nobody's heard of him here. Mujamma ibn Jariyah, nobody's heard of these companions. I'm not saying they're not companions, I'm not trying to belittle their status, but they're not the kind of companions in that sense of companions that were always around the Prophet. So if this was a belief issue, why were people not teaching it? And why did the early Imams not teach it? This was my question. Now, as to why people are so bothered, like when I've said this, I think it's just cognitive dissonance. Like they're thinking, if, like a lot of them are trying to scaremonger, like they're trying to say, if this could be wrong, then the whole Quran could be wrong. But I said, why do you have to go down, why do you have to do that? Like, why do you have to try to just intimidate Muslims further by, look, like people have said online, because if this could be wrong, then tomorrow you're going to question other things. What's that even supposed to mean? Like, look, I would rather have a faith built on what I believe to be established, as opposed to just scaremongering that, look, oh no, if I open the door, I'm going to realize it's all a lie.
Yes.
Like, why should I? And what's the big deal? Like, if I said, look, all Muslims who have died, let's say up until today, whether they believed in the second coming or not, did it really impact their lives? No. So what's the big deal? Whether he comes, doesn't come. I've just said it doesn't make any sense, because according to the Bible, it makes sense. Because according to the Bible, he's going to come to judge Jew and Gentile. He will bring the whole of mankind to submission. And for some reason, Islam is echoing that. Like, why is Islam echoing that? It doesn't make any sense. And so that's why I've problematized it. I've not problematized it. It is actually problematic. I would urge you, if you're ever bored and you've got about maybe an hour or two on your hands, watch that prelude. I highlight that, look, from a psychological perspective, if you want to analyze something, the devil is in the detail. These hadith carry the detail. I'm not making it up. Go through the detail. Why does the detail, and they keep saying, all the detail, they start saying, oh, it's a metaphor, it's a metaphor, it's a metaphor. Animals will become herbivores, vegetarians, snakes will refuse to bite, there'll just be peace, lions will graze with, and they say, oh, that's just a metaphor, there will be peace on earth. Oh, that's just a metaphor. Jesus will be forcing, it says Jesus will force mankind to become Muslim.
Yes.
Like he will give them the sword and say, you either fight me till the death, or you embrace Islam. Jesus spent his whole life saying, turn the other cheek. Now he's coming with such a 180 methodology
after he's killed the pigs.
Which, by the way, goes against the Quran. Why? The Quran said, and the Prophet never said you could force people to be Muslim. No. The Quran says, La ikraha fid din. Yes. Why are we all of a sudden okay with force?
Yes.
Like, I don't understand. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And so that's but there's a lot more. I mean, this is just a few minutes.
Wait, limited time. I'm going to take 3 questions because I just want to get a kind of feel, and then,
Sure.
So raise your hands. Nadir, Raza, and Sam. Nadir, please.
The question I wanted to ask is about, connected to Had and other things that you mentioned. It's more on concept of Kufr.
Kufr, okay, disbeliefs,
yeah. Explain what in Islam the concept of Kufr is, because this is lately, unfortunately, has become something that has been thrown around.
Do you mean like declaring people kafir? Is this what we're talking about, Kufr?
I mean, what is Kufr and what is Takfir as well? Is there one and the same, or are there really a difference? Because every time somebody says this is Kufr, and when you confront them, they go like, oh no, there's a difference between saying this is Kufr and making Takfir on it, so I didn't really do a Takfir, but I said that these outside of Islam.
I think this is a really good question, because if you're going to go from, you see, I've said this before, I've said, look, it's really interesting that Islam is a faith, first and foremost. It is a faith, yeah. During the Prophet's time, the companions, their students, going right up to the Imams like Imam Malik and these kind of people, which is like over 150 years after the Prophet. That era that is called the Salaf, the first 3 generations, right? This era, Hadith has been started to be documented at least after 100 years after the Prophet and things, but Fiqh was being documented, law, all these kind of things, loads of questions. In Imam Malik's time, The Mudawwana alone has over 30,000 issues. His other books put together, there's at least 100,000 rulings documented from him, from Abu Hanifa the same, from other Imams. All these people, they're documenting all their rulings. This is how, if you get into a dispute with your neighbors, you resolve it like this. If this goat dies like this, you resolve it like this. If this land dispute, if this inheritance dispute, if this... But yet nowhere are they teaching you what you should teach your children for faith. Like they don't say anywhere, by the way, teach your children this if you want them to be Muslim. Like nowhere, and you think that would be their first agenda. Because Islam primarily is a faith. So the hadith says, when the Prophet was asked, what is Islam? What is Iman, faith? He said that you believe in God. You believe in messengers, you believe in revelation, you believe that this is transmitted through angels, you believe that God is ultimately in control and an afterlife. That's it. He never said anything beyond. Now you could say, okay, maybe in 1-2 little things there's one thing added, but he never went through this. Now okay, let's just take that as an example. Then the Prophet says in a hadith that, look, there was a man who had committed so much atrocities throughout his life, that upon death he said to his children that, look, I've been awful throughout my life. When I die, I want you to cremate me. Get my ashes and scatter them everywhere. Right? Because I don't want an afterlife. Now, the hadith says that Allah commanded him to be risen. Like after he was dead. Like the ashes to, like let's say, he doesn't give the detail on how, he just says, commanded him to be risen, and asked him, why did you do this? And he said, because I was afraid, because I lived a terrible life. And then the hadith says, Allah says that, well, you're forgiven for this kind of fear, this God consciousness. But what's interesting here, for a moment, it doesn't mention his atrocities, by the way, it just mentions he lived a terrible life. Now, if we look at his belief construct, he believed that by having his ashes scattered, that God didn't know where his ashes were. So God wasn't all-knowing. He wasn't all-seeing. He was incapable of rendering him together. That there would be no afterlife. That he would like, just look at all the beliefs that he was carrying at that moment upon death. I mean, anybody today would, without a second, deem him a kafir. Yet the hadith says that he was fine. And in another hadith, the Prophet said that, look, nobody enters paradise except through God's grace. This isn't about actions and things like this. So this kufr thing, yes, there is, in the Quran, one could say that the kuffar are spoken of. Kufr in essence means to proactively deny something. In essence, that's what it means. The Prophet reasoned with people and that was the Prophet's lifetime. After the Prophet, you could say Muslims have a worldly sense of kufr and iman. Like, how do we deal with Muslims? How do we deal with non-Muslims? So they've got these categories. Does that mean that, okay, you've got Muslims, you've got kafirs. Does that mean a kafir is eternally doomed in the afterlife? Or is this just a worldly categorization that we're using? Most scholars said that this was a worldly categorization, and in the afterlife, God knows. Because these people, even Imam Ghazali said that, look, Islam, the way it's reaching the people around Constantinople and that region in his time, the Christians, he said it's so distorted. Why would they embrace Islam?
Can I just add, in Speaker's Corner as well?
Speaker's Corner is a joke. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Maybe some things there ain't. I don't know if anybody is a regular there, but what I've seen of clips that are sent around on, these viral clips I see, I don't watch them because they just annoy me. So, but sometimes I'll watch them. Like somebody will say, "Oh, you gotta watch this." I'll click it and think, for God. So I watched this clip the other day. Oh, it was the one that you had shared on the thing about the person arguing about would you marry a 9-year-old, and the person doing all this like hesitation and saying, well, before you say this, and why should I deny this? And I just think they make an abomination of the deen, and there's no way on earth anybody would be. You see, we've got to understand something. Every culture despises certain things. Yes. Like some things are unanimously not liked. Not liked is a very, but they're hated. Like obviously murder, like people don't like people murdering people. That's obvious all around the globe. But some cultures have certain inclinations towards a specific hatred for certain things. And arguably so, within that culture. Like here, rapists, pedophiles, things like this, especially in the Western world. In the other part of the world, they still look down and don't like these things, but maybe it's not that prevalent, or maybe it's not that picked up on. People ain't aware of the crime or things like this, or they've got other issues as well, like mass murder going on. And so in the Western world, these things are hated. Like they're hated. Why would a Muslim place the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that list willfully? Like why? Like it beats the hell out of me.
Because
like
it's
I
in
can't.
Bukhari,
No, I know it's in Bukhari, but the thing is, like,
you?
why would, like, look, like, let me give you an example. I said to somebody the other day, I said, let's take somebody like a philanthropist, Bill Gates, or he's still alive. Like, let's say Hawking, like Stephen Hawking, you know, despite his unbelievable disabilities, he was a legend in, you know, almost leading this thing of no boundaries, that there are no boundaries. Look what he achieved despite his disabilities. And he was a philanthropist, he was somebody that, a humanist, concerned about people being oppressed, concerned about Palestine, concerned about other things around the world, despite his state. Now look at an amazing person he was, wasn't he? Like as a human being, put the faith thing aside, and I know people got really offended when I said, may God have mercy on him, but put that aside. Let's just say his life was like it was a testament to the human will. We could all agree on that. Let's say tomorrow it was unearthed that before his disability, he had sex with a 10-year-old. Everything would go out the window.
Yes, true.
Let's just be honest.
It's true.
Nobody would quote him anymore.
No.
Despite him being the legend who he was. Despite him being a pillar of the human will against all odds. If it transpired tomorrow, there was some kind of footage or there was something that was revealed where, oh my God, before his disability, Stephen Hawking was a paedophile. There would be no more Stephen Hawking. That would be true RIP. And it wouldn't even be peace. How can you take somebody that's like to this culture and an alien character, a personality like the Prophet Muhammad, who's from an exotic era, from the Arabia, who's not even a part of this world like that? How would you, it doesn't matter what he has to say now. Once you say things like this, nothing else matters. So it really boils my blood when I see things like this. Like people got so offended that I mocked. And that was sarcasm. I was mocking the Dajjal thing because somebody was saying I'm a Dajjal. So I said like, well, I want to be a big Dajjal, you know, Antichrist. I don't want to be a small Antichrist. And people got offended. Oh my God, I put this KFC thing on I got my little daughter's alphabet and put it on my forehead. And it offended people. And they said, how can you mock the deen? I was speaking to somebody and I got so offended. Like not about that I got offended. I said, you guys teach that the Prophet was sexually involved with a 9-year-old child. You guys teach that the Prophet forcibly took captive slaves, sex slaves, like let's say Safiyyah, that almost like what would constitute rape. You guys say that he had like Maria just as a slave, not as a wife. You guys teach that he enforced a false testimony of Khuzaymah. You guys teach all this stuff. And your blood doesn't boil. And your blood boils when I mock the Dajjal. The Antichrist. Like I said, what the hell is wrong with you people? Like I'm mocking, like first of all I don't even believe he exists. But like even if he did, who gives a damn if I mock him? He's the Antichrist. You guys are more fussed, like you get offended when I mock the Antichrist. And you made a mockery out of the Prophet.
Yes.
That's like I'm like, wow. And you're declaring me almost like this is kufr, you need to repent to God. Like why have you mocked the Dajjal and stuff like this? I think, for God's sake, priorities are seriously misplaced here.
Messed up.
So, yeah.
Raza, question.
Alaikum salam. Shukran, man. Shukran.
Quick question regarding, you mentioned the state of Safiyyah.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that show that you've done in clarifying the Prophet's marriage terms. Those are the kind of shows that we need in today's time.
Of course, I agree.
Those are the shows that really learn and benefit from that.
Shukran.
And just like a follow-up from that in terms of something that's brought up by Orientalists and a lot of non-Muslims about the Prophet's war with the Banu Qurayza. So I'm not sure, maybe you probably addressed in one of your shows, I'm not sure, you've got quite a lot, but I was interested in that.
I have, and in the future I'd like to do something expansive, but just briefly, that I've mentioned that, look, there were certain, obviously this thing of Banu Qurayza is highlighted.
Can you just give a bit of
Okay, Banu Qurayza is a kind of neighboring tribe that had a treaty, and with the Prophet, they were Jewish generally. I mean, not all Jewish, but I mean, there was a Jewish settlement there. And there were other Jewish settlements like Hyde Park and these things, which were strong, fortified kind of settlements that the certain Jewish Arab residents had. Now, these were at a slight distance from Medina. They weren't too far, but they were at a slight distance from Medina. Now, the Prophet had treaties, and they had treaties with the Prophet, and treaties obviously meant a lot of things. Now, there was the Battle of the Ahzab, this kind of coalition that a lot of key, not all, but certain powerful tribes within Arabia, Quraysh and other tribes like Ghatfan and these other things, joined forces, and they tried to attack Medina to destroy it once and for all. And and that was the Battle of the Trenches, where they dug up the Muslims kind of dug up the trenches by Salman al-Farsi had given certain suggestions, and they dug these trenches and kind of protected Medina. Now, there were some weak spots as well, some vulnerable blind spots. Now, Banu Qurayza were one of the kind of leading settlements that betrayed their treaty and was part of the coalition and giving information on these weak spots, like how to penetrate. Now, the issue was that this wasn't a battlefield, this was a town. This was Medina. It wasn't like, hey, we're going out, we're having a battle here. This was just it was supposed to be a surprise attack, but they obviously found out they're coming. So they started preparing by digging the trenches. If they were successful, everybody, man, woman and child, would have been eradicated. There was no doubt about that.
Or enslaved.
Or enslaved, or it would have been a complete wipeout. It wasn't a war, it was just a death trap. That's all it was. Obviously, the Muslims were really hurt, and they were sometimes, when you're hurt, you're more hurt by betrayal as opposed to your outright enemy. Now, this thing of Banu Qurayza being one of the key perpetrators to give all this information, because the other people don't know about the settlement of Medina. So they told that here's a blind spot, here you can bring it in from here, you can do this, you can do that. So the Prophet after this went, because that was a full declaration of war. So the Prophet went there, but he, according to these narrations, I would also like to, I want to add a little caveat that I want to as well, before I do my full detailed thing, analyze some of these reports and go into them with much detail, as opposed to just, I have come across them, but there's a difference with when you actually fully look into something. But the general understanding that is transmitted is that they were murdered. Anybody that was of an age of fighting was was executed. But in the Hadith, it mentions this was not the Prophet's judgment. So when they get there, the Prophet, obviously they kind of round up their court, because they couldn't have, they wouldn't put up much of a fight. They weren't in that position. And the Prophet said to them, how would you like us to judge you? Because you basically were prepared to wipe us out entirely. And they said, we want Sa'ad to judge us, because he's from amongst, he had greater ties with them. So they said, we want him to pass the judgment. So the Prophet said, okay. And in fact, that's the hadith where he says, Qumu ila sayyidikum. So he was like a sayyid amongst them, like a renowned person. So he said, stand to attention for him. And he came and he passed that judgment, saying, I feel that because of this betrayal, they all deserve, anybody capable of fighting deserves execution. Now, that's in the same hadith, it's not but I would still like to, inshallah, when I give a detailed thing, analyze a lot of hadith and kind of just have a greater picture, because sometimes we've read things, but until we don't look at them closely, it's like, wow, this is interesting as well. So you might see certain flaws in the chains as well. So, but that's my general understanding for now.
I think Sheikh Hamza Yusuf has also done something in the Marrakesh Declaration where he said the numbers were grossly exaggerated. In some reports it's 800, some
right, like that kind of stuff.
Some is 40. In some reports he even forgave them, the Prophet ﷺ. So
I would like to. This is what I was saying. I'd like to kind of like. Because that Safiyyah thing is an example. You see, because this Safiyyah thing is a good example. It's not that I'd never heard of this. But look, the issue is this. Like we go through things, some learning is passive. Like we learn it, we don't really think about it, we're not really pondering over it until it hits us. And that Safiyyah thing kind of annoyed me. I saw that video. I don't know whether it was... that video where he was saying, and what? Where does it say the word rape? And it really kind of got to me that why would you say this? Because that is rape. Like what you're defining can't really be defined in any other word. Whether you use the word or not, it is what it is.
It is, right.
It's call a spade a spade. And then I thought, look, let me look into these narrations. Because somebody had asked me, can you look into these narrations when they sent me this video? Can you look into this incident? And my first response, if I'm going to be honest, was like, can't really give my full explicit response. It's being recorded. But I said, look, for God's sake, is it only me? Can't somebody else kind of look into these things? Like I can't be looking into everything. But then I saw some of the things online and I got a bit offended. And so I thought, let me look into this. And then I was shocked that it was all just transmitted through one transmitter, and then I started looking into it even more, and I found whoa, and then the whole narrative, and then it started opening up in front of me. I thought, wow, and so then I kind of read up on it, and I did that presentation on it. But this really needs a great effort from people.
Yes.
The problem is if only more Muslims were on this, that we would get greater kind of work done. Obviously, I look into certain things, but then I'm obviously confronting a lot of hate, which preoccupies a lot of my time. But
But just to give a plug out there, especially those watching online, and if you're watching this afterwards, Mufti Abu Layth has done an amazing breakdown on the Safiyyah issue. So on YouTube, type Mufti Abu Layth Safiyyah, inshallah that will come. And also, I had this thing about Sayyidina Aisha and the age of Aisha, and I really thank you. I haven't actually had a chance to meet you after that, but you did a 2-hour response on the age of Aisha. Watch that video if you've got doubts about it, and expand your mind. Don't just...
Because it's totally not true that she was a 9-year-old.
No, it wasn't.
Utterly not true. And I go through a whole breakdown, which I can't do justice to here, and this is proven by the same incidents. It's proven by the actual other hadith in Bukhari, the rulings of the jurists. Why did the jurists not consider this kind of stuff okay then?
Absolutely.
And I highlight, okay, some may have, but other classical jurists didn't. Imam Malik with his fatwa of no, a girl, you can't marry unless she's nubile. He says, and so these kind of things, how was this happening? And I give a full breakdown and I cover certain counter questions. And
it's amazing. It's amazing. Sam, we're going to go to Sam. People raise their hands if you still got questions?
Yeah, go for it.
And then we're going to go to the brother with the blue and then the brother with the blue.
Look at
cardigan
that.
After
doing
that.
the proper...
I'm doing the proper question time.
Question time. Yeah.
Thanks. I just have a quick question. I just want to know, how do we know that the things in the hadith are actually true, are actually what Prophet Muhammad says? The reason I'm asking is because in the Quran, when you read the Quran, God says that Prophet Muhammad didn't say anything from his own mouth. Anything that the angel gave or revealed to him, he would say that, and that would be what would be written in the Quran, not outside of the Quran. Because anything that he says, anything that he was revealed to would be in the Quran. So, for example, one of the things that I wonder, how did Prophet Muhammad know that dogs are not clean, or they're not, they're not clean, because it's not written in the Quran, and there's even mentions of the dogs in the Quran.
Hunting dogs in the Quran.
So I just wonder, how would he even know, from a scientific point of view, for example, we know that dogs are not dirty, they're just as dirty or clean as humans. So how do we know that if it's not mentioned in the Quran, to what extent are these hadiths are reliable?
Yeah, I think that's so the question is, how do we know about the authenticity of ahadith, especially when it's regarding just about the world around us? Like, so it's talking about animals being impure, or it's talking about these kind of things, and the Prophet does not, I'm just reiterating the question, the Prophet does not allegedly or speak except it's revelation.
Exactly, yeah.
This is one of the, this is a great misconception, that the Prophet does not speak unless it's revelation. This misconception is taken from Surah An-Najm, the verse where it begins, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَى عَلَّمَهُ شَدِيدُ الْقُوَى. That this is Surah An-Najm, that Allah is saying that this person of yours, this companion, is not, he's not somebody that you're thinking is crazy. He does not speak from his desires. It is but revelation that has come to him. This is speaking about the revelation. It's not speaking about just talk. So if the Prophet said, hello, oh, that was revelation, or he's speaking from revelation. That's not true, because the Prophet himself, in several hadith, speaks about regular things where he just says, look, this is not revelation. Where, like, let me give you an example, like in the Battle of Badr, when they're going, it's one of the first ever battles of self-defense taken upon by the Muslims. They go to a place and they say, let's set up camp. And the companion, it's in Bukhari, the companion says to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, is this revelation or is this your just a strategic thinking? And he says, no, it's just strategic thinking. He says, in that case, I think it's better that we go close to that place. It's closer to the water, to the well, and it's more of a vantage point if we're attacked. And the Prophet says, that's a good idea, let's go there. Now, in another example, the Prophet is speaking to Barira. There's Barira is this woman in Medina who was married to Maghith. They were both formerly slaves that were freed. And Maghith, who used to be her husband, and he was obsessed about her. And when they become freed, they freed people, they were Muslim. She no longer is bound by him, so she's a free woman, and she doesn't want to be married to him, so she's separate, and she's just going about her business. And he would follow her obsessively through the streets, pleading for her to take him back. And she wasn't interested. So, and that's in Bukhari. Now the thing is, somebody comes to the Prophet, I think Maghith comes to the Prophet and says, please, will you ask her to marry me? And the Prophet, in a hadith, says to her, Barira, will you take back Maghith? And she says, Ra'yun ya Rasulullah am wahi, is this revelation or is this your opinion? And he says, la, it's just an opinion. I'm just saying that, would you want to, he's obviously madly in love with you. She says, in that case, la, no. So this thing that, the Prophet only speaks about revelation, like when they were cross-pollinating the kind of seeds, and the Prophet said, that's strange that you do this. And it turned out to be a poor harvest. And the Prophet said, Antum a'lamu bi umuri dunyakum. You guys know this stuff better. I was just expressing an amazement, like saying, whoa, well, that's rather strange. It wasn't revelation. So Imam Qarafi from the Malikiya highlights that, look, the Prophet had different states of mind or roles that he was in. One state was like as a prophet, giving revelation. One was like as a judge. He was ruling between people specifically. And one was just a normal, like an advisor, like sometimes he would just say advice which was just regular things. He wasn't like giving revelation.
How do we know that all the hadiths are actually the statements from...
See, this is, in my understanding, subject to interpretation.
Yes.
Now, people could say, yeah, but it makes everything airy-fairy. I think, yes, it does. It adds an element of instability. But at the same time, everything doesn't just collapse, because you have to remember that the Muslims, you see, you've got to go back to when the Muslims started to expand, after the Prophet, Islam started to expand. The first thing, the primary focus was the Quran. And the second thing, it was also hadith, that they were teaching hadith, but it wasn't being documented. But the third thing was teaching people rulings, fiqh. Fiqh was being documented. Now, when it came to attacking or conspiring against Islam, or when it came to adding influence into Islam, the Quran was too difficult. Why was it difficult? It was one, too difficult, and two, quite fruitless. Because if I was somebody who wanted to add in an idea into Islam, if I said, let me put it into the Quran, the problem is the Quran has a certain style. It doesn't address all finite issues. So like, let's say I wanted to say about dogs, but the Quran doesn't generally speak like that about dogs. So it'd be odd. And then if I did want to add a verse, I would have to meet the style of all those verses within that surah, which are short verses, or whatever they are. Like, it's a really painstaking project. And then the Quran is so widespread because it's the only thing people are teaching, like with so much passion. The other thing is, okay, why don't we corrupt fiqh? Now, fiqh, there was less motivation to corrupt fiqh because not every scholar was an authority. Like if I say, oh, Imam Malik said this and I blag it.
Yeah.
But over here, people don't follow Imam Malik. So they're like, well, so what if he said it? But if I start corrupting hadith, it was easier.
Yes.
Because I just have to say, it doesn't matter, the style doesn't matter, this doesn't matter, and he's an authority. So this led to hadith corruption. But the sunnah, right, the way of the Prophet, a huge amount of it was already documented through fiqh practices as well. Now we know, like we've got hadith, the question is, do we know there to be, let's say, some truth in hadith? We know this by corroborating it. One, okay, there's the effort of preservation of chains, which is a good effort, not perfect, but it's a very good human painstaking effort that was taken. Then we know through fiqh and other teachings that, look, it's corroborated. So there's definitely truths here. The next question is, can there be some lies? Or, falsehoods? That's true, there could be. So how do we know this? We first of all check the chain. Once we've checked that, we check these things. Does it go against reason? Does it clash with the clearly established sources of Sunnah and Quran? And does it uproot a principle in Islam? If it does, then we've got a problem with it. Now let's say animals. Now there was a huge disagreement about this. Like Imam Malik rejected that hadith openly. He said, we've got this hadith about the dog, and he said, وَلَا نَدْرِ مَا حَقِيقَتُهُ. He said, I don't know what it's talking about, because the Quran says we can use hunting dogs, just like you said. So he himself says that, look, all animals, according to the school of Medina, the Maliki Madhab, life necessitates purity. Even a pig is pure. You don't eat it, that's a different ruling, but it's pure. So if a pig licked a bowl, it doesn't make it impure. Now, the dog ruling, many of the Maliki ulama, some just said, oh, we're just going to, okay, we'll take it, but we don't know what it's on about, we don't want to go against the hadith. Others explained it. They said that when the Prophet moved to Medina, in Mecca, there wasn't this culture of like pet dogs as much as it was in Medina. When the Prophet moved to Medina, they explained that there was, at a certain point, an outbreak of rabies, what I believe would be rabies today. They explain a certain disease that I believe, it sounds similar to kind of rabies when I was looking into it. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is I was looking up at rabies, that even today, unless you get very immediate medical treatment, it is fatal. Like rabies, even today, even with all the technology we've got today, like unless you're treated.
Can I just, on that point as well, on this point, we're running out of time, conscious, but hyperbole. I know you talk about, like, so Sarah in Speaker's Corner talks about the shaitan being in the nose of people. Yeah. The shaitan, the black dogs are shaitan. Can you just quickly, because I know... Yeah,
like these kind of things. So look, what it was that, like, the black dog is a good example, that look, with dogs, that the Prophet first tried to create a distance between people and dogs because he saw it was impacting people. And he said, look, and he used religious rhetoric because it was the rhetoric of the time. Like he said, anybody who has a dog, like if the dog licks your bowl, you have to wash it. And it's interesting, he said once with soil. Now soil, even today, they say it's very difficult. I was looking into the rabies report that it's one of the things that doesn't get contaminated, like when they're speaking about rabies. But it's interesting, and he gave a number, like what would be the significance of washing it with a number? And then in another hadith, people still weren't distancing themselves. So he said, anybody who has a dog at home, angels won't come in, or this won't happen, you lose reward. And then he said at one point that there were certain dogs that were afflicted more so, like a black dog in his time. He said, that's a devil. Stay away from it. But did this mean it was a literal devil? There's a hadith in the Muwatta that the Prophet said 1 traveler is a devil.
Yes.
2 travelers are devils. 3 is a caravan.
Damn.
Now, how would that make sense? Because he was using religious rhetoric to safeguard them. Yes. Now, this thing about when he said kill those dogs, they were obviously, those dogs were infected. Mm-hmm. Now, this wasn't in general, because this ruling didn't carry on. People weren't going around killing dogs everywhere they went. Mm-hmm. So
my final question, I think it might be relevant to everyone. Can we as Muslims today just rely on the teachings of the Quran and nothing else? So not actually have to rely on the Hadith, but just what it says in the Quran?
You see, the Hadith literature, I wouldn't personally... I'm against dismissing just Hadith literature, because a huge portion of valuable gems and things are there that reflect an understanding of the deen. Now, we know there's certain truths because they're corroborated. So that gives the potentiality that there's many more truths. But how do we know? So the criteria is fine. If it goes against these things, it's problematic. Generally saying, look, I want to reject all hadith as a whole altogether, does give rise to great problems in the sense that many things do come to it. I mean, they are in fiqh now, because they've been incorporated by fiqh, but they do come to us through hadith. I don't think we have to be very fearful of, yes, this is a different question. If you read a hadith as a common person, you read a hadith and it didn't settle with you. Like I read a hadith and I think, well, what the hell is that on about? I don't believe you have to follow that hadith. Right. You can meanwhile you can inquire about it, learn about it by all means, but you do not need to feel that, I must follow this, but because I'm a layman, I don't know. If it clashes with reason in your sense, and that is based on, look, you get that hadith, you can get that teaching from a hadith. That the companion, when the Prophet sent a group of companions and he said, make sure you obey the leader, and that leader came out with a weird ruling. Like he said, at one point there was a dispute and he said, I want all of you to jump into the fire to prove this. And one of the guys said, I ain't going to do it. He didn't know much about Islam, think about it, it was early Islam. But he said, we came to Islam to escape the fire, why would I jump into fire? Like he was just using reason. And he went back to the Prophet and he said that this person said this. I said, I ain't going to do that. And the Prophet said, you were right.
And you can
never
always
follow people by this.
Always ask Mufti Monday nights with Mufti.
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a plug right now. Ask Mufti any questions and stuff.
Monday nights with Mufti, people.
We've got 20 minutes before we address the brother with the question. I'm just going to liven it up because we've got over 111 people on live chat right now. So I'm going to ask which brother used the toilet last. There you go. That woke you up. Anyway, that was a joke. Next question, please.
Ibadah doesn't benefit Allah. Yeah. So if somebody uses that reason, then to what extent could you extend its application? So if somebody could then say in any aspect of Islam that believing that Allah created you
doesn't it doesn't benefit Allah. That is a good question. Look at you challenging me, intellectually challenging
me. Put it in, get in.
See, this is what happens when I haven't had that Red Bull. Right? I don't know you're going to catch me out. Otherwise I wouldn't have said it.
You stumped the great Mufti.
No, I think, look, that's a good question. But I think it's the whole wisdom and wonder element that is amazing about insan, about human beings. Like if you think about it, we are like nothing. Like if you think about it, just look at one from the cosmos, zooming in, we're not even a speck from the cosmos. Not even a speck. Then you come in and even on Earth, if you look through the species, we're just moderately okay. Like we're not that massive kind of like, okay, primates are just okay. Like we're bigger than some species, we're smaller than others. You wouldn't think, if you look at this, in fact, I'm going through this book called The Third Chimpanzee. And it's quite an interesting book. But it said, look, if like an alien came to Earth and you got a human being, stripped him down, and he couldn't speak, let's say he could only just grunt and groan and whatever, and you put him in a cage next to other primates, that alien would just assume that we are just another version of that species. Like, they would just think this is a third chimpanzee. It's not like, except it's hairless. That's all. They wouldn't really, we don't actually come across that different.
Unless
like, we're slightly different. Right? Unless you're eating curry. Think, whoa, that one's eating something rather unique though.
I was talking about the hair.
Okay.
I was stuck.
I mean, I don't know actually. But the thing is, so, yet, look how capable this insan is.
Yes.
Like, look how we are fathoming the cosmos. Amazing. This little creature from the cosmos to the quantum. Look how we're just invading all these kind of portals and just understanding things, and it's something. And this is the miracle, in my understanding, of Adam, of us being that offspring of this kind of revolution. This is in the Quran, where Allah says that you cannot understand, although addressing it as to the angels, that you don't understand what this thing is. Now, this is something that you see here, this insan.
We've got 10 minutes left. I know you've got another question. Can I come back to you on that one, bro? Because I want to give two other people a chance. There was the brother in the green, and your brother in the green first, please.
Just want to ask, a lot of Islamic discussion seems to centre around hadith. And
around what, sorry?
Hadith,
around hadith.
Yeah.
Okay.
And do you believe, if we don't confine it to history, as the brother was saying,
Sure.
does it need at least a re-evaluation or reclassification? Because a lot of things you hear nowadays, it's just from the hadith, where people are almost ignoring
I totally, so the question, would I, without being dismissive of hadith, would I feel that it requires an evaluation? I totally agree. I wish that not just fiqh, not just hadith, fiqh, all these things, I wish they were evaluated and brought into sync. Fiqh more so from a practical perspective, and hadith in the sense, like, people have been, by the way, like, so for example, people have been doing this, but in their own methodology. So, like, let's take Albani as an example, the hadith scholar of the Safiyyah. Now, he evaluated hadith. He went through, this is the sahih of this is the da'if of this is the sahih of Tirmidhi, the da'if of Tirmidhi, the sahih of Nasa'i, the da'if of Nasa'i, the da'if of the Muwatta, right, of Imam Malik. And so he did this, but he had a different agenda. His agenda was very similar to the, like, certain muhaddithin of the past, like, I only want to focus on chains. Like, it was almost just like a lab experiment. It had very little ecological validity. It wasn't about how does this fit in with the real world. It was just about theory. Like, I'm interested in chain studies. I want to see, do these evaluate? Do these add up once evaluated? I think we do need to evaluate these things in light of reason, in light of our contemporary age, and we need to check what are the issues. And I really dislike this culture of this thing of saying that the most authentic book after the Quran. That has landed us in this problem. Right, I personally respect Imam Bukhari. I love his hard work that he did. See, he was a human being. He didn't force you to follow him in that way to sanctify him. He just spent his life, and other hadith scholars, they had a certain, I think personally, Imam Bukhari's way of thinking, from what I can get from his tarajim, his chapter headings. You see, if I've got to be careful because people hate my guts. Some people. I think it was a bit socially awkward, like borderline, I don't know, I've used the word in the past saying I think some of these scholars may have been autistic.
Not Imam Bukhari.
Had a certain understanding, like, so he looks at hadith and he takes rulings which you think, so his way of thinking is nothing is permissible unless it's proven through hadith. So he'll say things like, the permissibility of saying salam while sitting on a horse. Like, you don't, like the permissibility of sitting back and answering somebody.
Yeah.
Like he'll say the permissibility of, like, do you see what I mean? Like he will take rulings from any description. Like imagine there's a hadith that somebody knocked on the Prophet's door in the evening. He would, as an example, I'm not saying he's done this, but as an example, he would chapter head it as the permissibility of knocking somebody's door in the evening. Like you see, everything is so almost autistically done that why would you need permissibility to do that? Like, I don't like that way, that kind of trajectory that you're heading to, this kind of this point where you're shooting from. To me, is too socially awkward. But he didn't force you to follow it. He didn't say, by the way, if you don't follow my way of thinking, this was us. So he's an example, may Allah have great mercy on him, but like him, many of the muhaddithin, they had their way of thinking. Hadith, I think, alhamdulillah, there's a great thing, it's a great project that has been preserved, but we shouldn't get into this, it's the most authentic book after the Quran business. And so yes, evaluation, I'm totally for that, but the problem is, people are not up with this, if they evaluated it, they would probably just do what Albani did.
Yeah.
And that's not what we need.
Yeah.
Just following on from that, you mentioned real world earlier.
Like fiqh, yeah.
Because again, a lot of this discussion is where we seem to argue over what's happened over 1,000 years ago.
I agree, yeah.
As opposed to what we're going to do.
Yeah, British Muslims.
Right?
Yeah.
So, do you feel that that's almost holding us back?
I feel it's massively inhibiting our growth, and there's other things as well. We're going through identity crises, we're going through other things, like us in the West, Muslims in the West are naturally, look, we're going to be confused. We're obviously of an ethnic background, most of us, born and raised here now. We're kind of seeing that where do our loyalties, people, and these questions, I hate these questions. And I don't like the way Muslims answer them, that makes it even worse.
Yes.
So this, are you British first, are you Muslim first? I just watched a clip the other day of this lady, I forgot her name now, Lauren or something with that Ali Dow, and this question came up again, and this, are you British first, are you Muslim first? I said, first of all, I'm Muslim. Look, first of all, like I don't like that question like that,
no.
And secondly, I wouldn't answer it like that.
No.
Because that immediately creates an us versus you element.
100%.
Because you're naturally dissociating yourself with the general British people. What does that mean? Like, are you a human being first? Are you a Muslim first? Like, it depends on, like, what does this question actually mean? Like, it doesn't really, like, people say, yes, well, it means, like, if Islam clashed with British, like what? With British, what would it clash with? Like what, with British laws? Like, is that what you mean? Like, give me an example where it clashes. And maybe that, look, first of all, certain laws can be advocated for and you can argue certain laws in Parliament. And in other cases, maybe your Islamic understanding is impaired. So I don't know, this kind of thing like, oh, I must say, and Muslims then feel I must say I'm Muslim first. What they ought to say is, look, this question doesn't make any sense. I'm as British as every other British person.
Yeah, one of the examples of that part of it is the acceptance of like homophobia.
Yeah, I don't know why Muslims, and this is a Western Muslim phenomenon.
Yeah.
This kind of Muslims, some Muslims, I can't say, sorry, if I'm saying Muslims, I don't mean all Muslims. Certain Muslims carry an extreme form of homophobia.
Yes.
This is weird because it's not in our sources, it's not in our texts, it's not in our history. I've said on one thing, people got very offended. I went through, like, homosexuality was rife in the Muslim civilization. Except it wasn't the way it is today. It was more a sense of, it wasn't, today it's become an identity, it's like a light switch effect, you're either homosexual or you're not. In the past it was more just, it was a sense of their version of what they felt was beauty. And they felt beauty could have been wherever, and that kind of Greek legacy of, what do they call it, pederasty, like this relationship between teenage boys or late teenage boys and men. And this is in the books, like historically, right from the Greek tradition into the Middle Ages. And it wasn't that Muslims were all saying you should do this, but they were saying, it's not allowed by Islam, but they weren't this hate. And even today, if you go to the Muslim world, yes, they don't openly say, you should be homosexual, but they don't have this hatred.
So just to clarify, when you say beauty, you mean beauty that everyone can say, this guy is a good-looking guy, or this woman is...
You see, it's interesting because we find it sometimes difficult to relate to what they're saying. So, because maybe because of a lack of the... No, I'm just joking. But I was reading Imam Nawawi, for example. There's a discussion in the past that should, like boys in their late teens, should they cover their faces and do niqab? And they call them amrad, like who don't have fully developed beards and stuff like this. And Imam Nawawi is a classical imam of great stature and knowledge. And he said that, look, no, and he gives this discussion, not really, or this or that, or blah, 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 or maybe if they're causing such a stir. But then he ends it by saying, otherwise, he says, it's undisputed that the beauty of these boys outshines the beauty of women.
Wow.
So I thought, whoa, okay.
Easy now, Imam Nawawi.
All right. But I thought that's interesting, like, raises curiosity on all levels. But it's... So, we can't seem to relate to some of the things that they're saying, or maybe some people can, but I'm just saying that it's...
Can I just ask you on that, because I'm going to move on to that question, but this is quite important because we've got lots of people watching online as well. What's this business about throwing homosexuals off buildings? For me, I can't understand.
Honestly, that is nonsense, man.
It's nonsense, it's wrong.
It's so stupid. I saw this video going around of some madrasa school in the UK. We couldn't see the people, but I think it was some female teacher... I think in niqab or something, teaching girls about, look, otherwise we know what happens to homosexuals, what do we do? They're like, well, you just, was it homosexual they're saying? Yeah, homosexual, you push them off cliffs and you do this, and I'm thinking, where the hell did you get that nonsense from? This is some people... No, what they're trying to say is that there's a description of the people like Sodom and Gomorrah in the Quran and a punishment, that they were punished. They weren't pushed off any cliffs, but it speaks about like something like almost like meteors or something coming down, and that town was destroyed. But in some weak hadith and fabric Israeliyat are things that are transmitted from previous religions into Islam. Israeliyat have done such damage to Islam, wallahi, such damage. Right, these kind of things that have been brought in from like prior Jewish traditions, and so those Jewish converts and Christian converts at the time brought in all their knowledge. So they say in other traditions, for example, the people, I think in the Bible they were turned into salt, pillars of salt, and that in some traditions that the land was raised and flipped and crushed or something like this. In some Israeliyat tradition. So people are trying to say, maybe there should be an Islamic equivalent. So obviously we can't raise the land, so take them to a cliff and push them off.
Wow.
This is so stupid. No, because look, check this out. You would say, like people, look, well, I don't know, I would assume, I could be wrong, I would assume worse than that. Because homosexuality has been more accepted throughout the world, even historically, through several civilizations. Ibn Hazm in his book on love, right, his Tawq al-Hamama, huge chunks of it are just about homosexual love.
No way.
And he speaks about, I saw this guy and the Imam's son, and they were behind this.
When you say homosexual love, are you talking about carnal or just something where you can have love for your fellow man?
No, they were speaking very clear, like sexual. So they were speaking about having sex and doing all these things. So he speaks about, I saw this guy and the son of the Imam and this person, they were sitting behind this place, they were kissing, I saw them do this, or this guy wanted to have sex with that guy and this guy. And he has all these stories. And he begins the book by saying, I've only put in here anecdotes that I've either personally witnessed or heard from a thiqah, like a trustworthy source. He says, I've not just put any stories in here. And he begins by saying, I write this book and I'm over 40 years of age. Like he's not writing this as some kind of like, I'm just a kid. Right? And he was a great hadith scholar. There's this thing of like, I would have thought more shocking to people would be incest. I would have just thought. Like the incest taboo is probably more universal than the homosexual taboo. right? Because you could argue even through the animal kingdom, because most animal creatures are bisexual as well, to some extent. But maybe incest kind of taboo exists more throughout globally. This is my perception. Yet when Imam Malik in the Mudawwana is asked, and I shared this, when he's asked that, look, there's communities that they marry their sisters, marry their mothers, and marry their daughters, should we, where possible, intervene? And Imam Malik said, no.
Wow.
And they said, well, what the hell? But they're marrying their sisters and marrying their daughters and Imam Malik said, look, if that's their deen, and deen means way of life. If that's their deen, he said, it's none of our business. And he said, doesn't Allah teach you to be tolerant even of people who reject Him, let alone His laws?
Yes, so true, mashallah.
So, this was Imam Malik who was in a position of power. Not, like he could have exercised that power. You would think that people would have been more like, oh my God, that's sick, look what he's doing with his own mother. But yeah, Imam Malik was like, no, so why this? Like, yes, okay, in Islam, certain things are forbidden, but why? This is what I said on this thing once, that some Muslim imams were kind of teaching on this WhatsApp group once. They were kind of saying, oh, this is a homosexual, Islam dictates we should stand so much of a distance from that homosexual, like 3 meters, or we should have this and that. And I said, what the hell's wrong with you guys, man? Like, they may have been joking, but it was only an imam's thing. And I said that, look,
madrasas, right?
I said,
not all madrasas.
Oh, don't worry about you gotta, in order to know that you're not.
Yeah, of course.
It's a joke. Nowadays, somebody's going to take that out of context now, right? So the thing is that, look, I don't do myself any favors. That's the problem, right? So, so this thing, look, I said like gambling is haram.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a hatred for gamblers? Like, do you think, oh, gambler, I hate him? No. The gambling is actually mentioned in the Quran. I said, look, people, you don't have a hatred. Like, you could say causing harm is haram. You don't have a hatred. I said homosexuality, okay, you could say it's haram, but why do you have this hatred? Like, let people be. It's their way of life. Isn't it? Nobody's saying you. And people say, oh my God, if they start saying homosexuality is okay, we're all going to become gay. I think this just proves the psychological point, isn't it? It's insecurity. It's that Edgar Hoover thing, isn't it?
We've got two more, probably time for two more. I know you've done really well. I know you're out. Drink some water, please.
Yeah, all right.
2 more questions. We might get chucked out by the caretaker at any time. Just before we ask those questions, has everyone enjoyed this so far? Yeah.
Anybody saying no, chuck them out now.
A regular event. So if you want it once a month, those who haven't paid me £3, please pay me after. So I had to get that in there.
Right, so, all right, what are some questions?
So 2 questions left probably. We'll get you.
So one question is obviously, you mentioned that the scholars, they see more as saints as opposed to actual religious figures.
They're seen what, sorry? Oh, like priests, yeah.
A priest as opposed to religious figures and followers, teachers. Obviously, it's mentioned in the Quran and in the Hadith that they're the inheritors of the prophets and things like that. So with regards to that, obviously, you're not taking more...
You see, that's just to... Oh, is there more to the question?
Yeah, there's more to the question.
All right, sorry.
Also, obviously, you mentioned that in the religions, that reasoning as well, the scholars do account for reasoning. Now, there are certain scholars from the past, they don't say reasoning is part of Islam. Like Ahlul Kalam, they're against Ahlul Kalam, or for example, Qadariya, people who were about predestination. They said that was something that's not allowed. And to have reasoning within Islam is not allowed.
Okay.
No,
sure, of course.
So, obviously, when you have that, and you know there's different lines of reasoning.
Right, okay, so just to reiterate the question, there were some scholars who rejected reasoning. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, there's some scholars who rejected reasoning, and you give the example of Ahlul Kalam, theologians. And then you said that about the ulama, we should look at them, like I mentioned earlier on, they're more like priests, but the Hadith mentions that they are the inheritors of the Prophet. See, I answered this recently, not this, but I referred to this, I think it was just last week, where I said that we superimpose our knowledge, existing knowledge, onto the texts. So in the Quran, it says, look, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِ الْعُلَمَاءِ, that indeed those who, it is truly the ulama who fear God, who have this fear of God. I said today we say, oh yeah, that's obvious, it's the clergy. Ulama means the clergy. The question is, when this verse was being revealed, there was no clergy.
Good point.
So what did it mean when it said ulama? Because the clergy are like a system that were later on evolved within the Islamic civilization. The clergy didn't exist in the Prophet's time. They weren't like, hey, there go the clergy. There wasn't like a clergy. So who were the ulama? Ulama meant people of deep insight, of deep knowledge. That I'm not debating. It is people of deep knowledge that inherit the wisdom from the prophets. I totally accept that. It doesn't necessarily mean ulama as we understand it today as the clergy. The clergy are like people who've gone through a certain institution and they've now emerged with certain kind of codes, and we now have a status. It may be certain people amongst them. I'm not saying that now these are not mutually exclusive. It doesn't mean anybody who is a clergy cannot be true ulama. They can be, but it's not what they would call in Arabic lazim malzoom. It's not something that one necessitates the other. So in fact, today madrasas are the reason I said that earlier on is I was talking about today more so, by the way, when I wasn't speaking about all time. But today madrasas, these seminaries, dumb you down. They forcefully shut off your critical thinking. Yeah.
I mean, the reason I mentioned it in the line of basically asking that them classical scholars, some of them forbade using reasoning.
Right, okay, now this is a good question. You know, when you said ilmul kalam, that's not true, because ilmul kalam is not reasoning. Ilmul kalam is theology. So what it was is that, to explain it better, it's philosophical theology. So it was that at the time in early Islam, with the advent of Greek philosophy coming into the Greek traditions, getting translated, mass translated into Arabic, a lot of scholars started delving into, well, you know, this kind of like, can God create a rock heavier than what he can lift? This equivalent they started delving into. Like, so the Christian, how many angels can stand on a penal, the pin's head or whatever, and stuff like this. Now, Muslims started their own, can God do this? Oh, but what if God was like, when he speaks, what is his speech like? Does it consist of words? Is it like letters? When you write it down, is it still part of his speech? These things became known as kalam. And the reason they called it kalam is they said this is just useless speech. And Imam Malik, when it started to emerge early on, he said that this kalam has no action associated with it. Leave it alone. Like, you're talking about things that we have no answers, definitive answers for. So you're just confusing certain people by saying, can God do, and they didn't see it as beneficial. Okay, there may be some benefits to it because later on it was there anyway, so you need answers. But that was not reason. Some scholars did speak against reason later on as a reaction to the Mu'tazila. The early Mu'tazila were not, you know, people do an injustice to Islam by constantly translating Mu'tazila as rationalists. Mu'tazila were not rationalists. The Mu'tazila were an extremist sect that emerged in early Islam. The reason they emerged is because of the first belief they held that anybody who commits a sin is no longer a Muslim. But they said, the Khawarij said, anybody who doesn't commits a sin is a kafir. You can kill him, depending on context. The Mu'tazila said he's no longer a Muslim, but he's not a kafir, he's in a suspended state, a purgatory, which they called it manzila bain al-manzilatayn. This is why they became isolated, and they were known as Mu'tazila, the isolated group. Right. Later on, some amongst them championed reason, because they realized it was a way to catch out their opponents. What some of the Sunni scholars started to do, instead of taking it back from them and saying, but we also champion reason, it became sectarian warfare. So they started to reinforce their ideas to diss them. They started saying, oh yeah, but... So for example, some classical Sunni scholars, Imam Abu Hanifa denied magic as a phenomenon. Now, maybe a century later, some Mu'tazila started to say, you guys are idiots, you even believe in magic. So what Muslims ought to have done is said, well, why? Some of us don't. But what they started to do was, to reinforce it, but the Prophet had magic done on him. To reinforce their views. It became a kind of like they got locked into sectarian warfare. That caused this thing of dissing reason. Otherwise, it's stupid. Without reason, we do not know Islam to be true. Anybody who says otherwise, I would welcome them to have a dialogue with me.
I mean, but doesn't it vary between people? I mean, some people have reasons that some people different other people. I mean, like, even living, some people say that, you know, this is all like an artificial kind of existence that we're in.
Sure. Simulation.
Yeah, this is sort of reasoning that is different.
Like, no, but look, I'm not speaking about, like, that's probable, it's reasonable. Like, we're in a simulated state, it's reasonable. But I ask people, look, I had a discussion with somebody just about a week ago, came down, right, okay, the person came down and said this same thing about reasoning, and I asked him, let me tell you the story of, I told him the story of Ganesh, Lord Ganesh in Hinduism, or Hanuman, the monkey god, who goes to Sri Lanka to save Sita and then flies back. I asked him, is this absurd, or is it just something you don't accept? I know you don't accept it, but is it absurd? He said, it's absurd. I said, explain to me how it's absurd. And it becomes impossible to explain the absurdity except through reason. It is that same reason I'm resorting to, that you would use to disprove, like, you would show the absurdity of an elephant god. It's that same reason I'm resorting to. I'm not resorting to just theories, that same block-based reason. No, I'm sorry.
Last question for today. I hope that's all right. Hopefully we'll have a lot more opportunities to do that. Then we're just going to... All right, we're going to have two questions. Sister here and then the brother.
And then the caretaker's got a question. Now what the hell are you still doing here? Sheikh who? Yeah. Have you watched my video with him? Okay, it's on my Facebook page. So me and Sheikh Akram Nadwi, we delivered a whole course called Debunking Myths. And in it we concentrate, there's two videos, one debunking the myth of magic and the other of demonic possessions. There's no such thing in Islam as possession. And it actually goes against the teaching of the Quran, where even the shaitan, Allah, at the words of the shaitan, says that even he will say, once everything is over, that, إِنَّمَا دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ لِي, I just whispered to you, you're the one who did it. If the actual devil is so incompetent and so incapable, how can these demons actually make you do things? So it's this is all, it goes against the true understanding. There isn't a single Sahih Sarih hadith to teach demonic possession. And obviously, I'll tell you why it offends a lot of people, because there's two reasons. One, there's a huge multi-billion pound industry at the back of this. And secondly, because Muslims are so, they hate this kind of mental stigma. So people would hate to say, like, my aunt or my mom may have mental issues, but they'll happily say she's got a tribe of jinn attacking her. So this is why, because it's okay to say that, but it's not okay to say she's maybe suffering from mental health. So people get offended. Ruqya and stuff like this. You see, Ruqya, first of all, the Prophet never said you need to do Ruqya or anything like this, but he did tell people to medicate. In fact, there's a hadith in Bukhari where the Prophet praises those people who he says that they will enter Jannah just walking, like nothing upon them. وَلَا يَسْتَرْقُونَ, and they never did Ruqya. That's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari. But in this, if a person does Ruqya, I believe it's like a ritual. And in my course, I explain the Harvard study. And I go through it in detail on where ritual patterns can have the same neurological impact as medication. So I mean, I quote the study and I go through it in details and the sample size and stuff like this. But yeah, so I believe it has an impact, but I do believe it's kind of psychological.
When the person is receiving Ruqya from the Prophet, when they start to act.
Yeah. It's all part of the narrative. Yeah, it's... No. I'm not accusing people of being liars. Okay, there's a difference here. I'd like to make that critical point. People really believe what's happening. Psychosomatic effects are real. You feel actual pain through psychosomatic kind of impact. You can actually, you can have placebo and nocebo effects. These are actually, in fact, the study quotes 1/3 of the people actually got ill and threw up in that study. This was not a lie they were doing, but the human mind is so powerful. These are vignettes. They create vignettes and you respond to the narrative. Obviously, imagine you never had any idea of this whole thing. It wouldn't impact you because you don't know how to react. But because you buy into the narrative, it can have an impact now.
Well, firstly, I just want to say,
it's
magic.
All right.
And the other point was the Quran tells us to use our brain, don't people think. So I don't know where that comes from.
No, absolutely. I want to add that the Quran says, وَهُوَ شِفَاءٌ لِمَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, that it is a cure. In another verse, it does say shifa, but the Quran explains the Quran. And the Quran, it says that it's shifa'un lima fi sudur, is a shifa for what is in the hearts. Yeah. Nobody today, if they had a fatal injury or fatal disease, would say, okay, everybody sit around and start reading the Quran.
Alright, so...
Technically speaking,
yeah.
He's got to pay for his mini cab home. Yeah, he's upset right now. So
sure, no problem.
Try to think, everybody just donates a little bit extra.
Yeah.
No problem. No.
Depends how much the mini cab is.
£15, so I don't know.
£15? Well, listen, he's black, bro. You speak to him, bro. Give him that. Gab, do something.
All right, people. Sorry, I couldn't take it many questions from here. That's because we've got a live audience.
How long can we have extra? How long can we have to pay for his cab?
For it?
Yeah, sweet, bro. All right, so basically, we aren't going to have too many, maybe 2-3 more questions. I know, there was actually even more people supposed to come, but hopefully we've had a nice, intimate conversation. Thank you very much, Mufti.
Very welcome, inshallah.
So yeah, if you've got a couple more questions, I know Nazam, Wasim, and then Raza. Those are the last 3. Thanks.
Sure, go for it, man. All right. Look at that. You're asking a question.
No, it's not asking me.
I'm sorry then. There's 2 opinions in that. MashaAllah. Naam.
Question is, nowadays, at least for me speaking, it's very difficult to find authentic knowledge of studying Islam. I'm just wondering if you could give us some advice, how to study Islam today, from the right understanding of Islam.
I get asked this a lot, and it's difficult. I mean, first of all, I just want to say I wish this was a very simple answer. I wish it was. It's complex because the people who dominate this scene it's not an enlightened kind of industry, unfortunately. I wish there are some people there, but I would say begin with, do try to learn the Arabic language. It will give you a portal into a whole different world to start off with. Okay. The Arabic language, seriously speaking, within a year, you can clock it. 6 months to a year. When I first learned Arabic, I learned it, the very basic thing I learned within 5 months. Okay, I went through a book. I must have been about 17 at the time. I went through this book it was Dr. Surti's Quranic Arabic. It's still around. It is a bit boring, but it's centered on the Quran. So his style may appear a bit boring, but every lesson shows you now you understand these verses of the Quran. Now you understand these verses. So by the time you reach the end, you're like, wow, I actually understand all of this. So I would say that then maybe familiarize yourself with certain, let's say fiqh, how to practice, and start just acquiring more and more knowledge as you're going along. Listening to certain lectures. I don't think you need to shy away from questions. People say, no, you shouldn't delve into certain things, or be afraid, you don't need to. Just keep learning, keep adding, but that's a starting point. That's what I would say, definitely. I don't know, there's loads of institutes. By the way, by all means, if you have access to a local madrasa that runs a part-time course, sign up. I'm not against these madrasas. I encourage people, in Birmingham, I don't know the madrasas around here. In Birmingham, there's local madrasas. They do part-time courses free of charge, as far as I'm aware. Things like, I think, As-Sufa, places like Hasanat College in Birmingham. A lot of my friends actually study there. But I say that, look, you don't need to, like, when you're there, you've got your mind. You don't need to be dumbed down. You can that's interesting. Don't argue with the teachers, but just raise questions and then you do your own research. That's what I'm saying, yeah. Now.
Quick question. Sheikh, it was about, I don't know, one thing I was trying to add to what you just said, that you made a really good point before in one of the videos about whatever you learn, always know if the teachers have taught the Muslims that there's an ikhtilaf of opinion on an issue, then we wouldn't be listening to everything.
True. Wallahi. Oh man, that is so true.
There's ikhtilaf on this. I'm not going to go out thinking this is a lot. I'm going to know that ulama have ikhtilaf on this.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. That is.
What I was going to ask you, Sheikh, is that there's a what you call a movement nowadays. People, the awam nas, the common person, or someone just studying, we kind of go direct to the original sources. So I'll open up a hadith book, quote Bukhari, I'll quote a Quranic verse, I'll go directly into it. Do you feel like a lot of the dangers of doing that, rather than not referring to, not say cut your internet, but referring to the fiqh, like you said, jurisprudence and the understanding of scholars of the Bible?
I am very much traditionally inclined. Contrary to what people's perception, I do believe that there's a difference in just dabbling. Like, you're like some person, I just want to learn a bit about Islam, I don't want to learn too much. That, I suppose, it's free reign, whatever they can do, however they can do it. People who want a serious understanding of the deen, they would begin with Arabic, they would learn fiqh, they would start looking at the other sciences, a bit of usul, other ways of thinking, study hadith, go through the Quran. I am very much in the breadth of the Islamic sciences. You would cover them to gain an understanding. It will take training. You yourself will change your views later on. You will have views at the beginning, which later on you'll think, like I've changed my understanding there. You don't need to begin like when I said have a critical mind, I don't mean that you need to begin as in, I am creating the wheel. I'm not in favor of that. And also when you're saying, I want to go direct to the sources, like I want to open the Quran and Hadith, there's two angles to that. One, I think it's good to familiarize yourself with certain things, but not to think that, look, I am going to create all of this here today. Like I'm going to create the wheel. So let me sit down, open Bukhari and go through it. Like I mentioned, look, Bukhari had a style of writing. From his chapter headings, it's actually quite socially awkward. If you inculcate that way of thinking, it will result in a certain phenomenon that is going to be problematic. Then you're going to also think, well, what the hell's going on here? How come we've got a hadith here which goes against? So I would advise that going with the general kind of curriculum, so to speak, in learning fiqh, in learning the legacy that we have.
It's like sometimes you'll say, God, Imam Malik said this, Imam Shafi said this,
Yeah.
Ulama said this, and someone will say, what does it matter? Bukhari says this. It's like you're leaving 1400 years of legacy.
Yeah, legacy, yeah.
You talk about the war, you're leaving legacy and you're just basically saying, go directly to Bukhari.
Yeah.
And it's like, so did not those scholars know the text of Bukhari?
I totally agree. I think it depends as well where you are in your studies and what it is that you're looking at. If, for example, if you're beginning at an elementary stage or an intermediate stage, I wouldn't advise, maybe as one-offs, people, their own kind of ventures, that's different. I wouldn't advise getting preoccupied with that kind of way of like, let me go here, I want to reject all this legacy. Once you've done a certain amount of training, like a doctor, like he's got to go through the certain basics, go through the things, get familiarized with the whole industry, with the whole science, then maybe later on have your theories. Nobody's saying don't have theories. I welcome people to challenge certain things. They might say, look, all these scholars have said this, however, it's interesting that, look, when we look in true light, there's nothing actually sahih to say this. I welcome these kind of discussions. But you don't need to do that as that is your way, that is my purpose, just to destroy the legacy. Like it's not a purpose, it's just along the way there may be certain things that ain't in sync with our day and age. And we look at that and think, well, let's look through our legacy, there's maybe been diversity, that's interesting, now let's reevaluate the sources. But that's not your objective to kind of to kind of divert from the legacy, but to add to it. Do you understand? To be part of that rich legacy.
Mufti, just one thing. I've always wanted to say this on your live chat.
Go for it, man.
All right. So anyway, should we take? I know we've got one question here. We're going to kind of wrap it up. Thank you, Wasim, for paying for the cab fare for the brother. Big up, Wasim. Should we take one question from the live chat?
Guys, any questions?
Whoever gets in first.
Let's see if there's any questions coming up. Obviously, people.
Suddenly, we've got all these people watching now.
Yeah. Guys, if you've got any questions, fire away.
First, one question, live chat. We're making it interesting. All the way
there you go. People are like, why'd you do that? I did really now it's just become a habit. I love winding people up. People are like, oh, why does he do that? The devil sign. Why would the devil? Are you telling me the devil doesn't have?
Is hell eternal?
Ooh, is hell eternal? I've answered that previously. You see, there's a difference of opinion on is hell eternal. Some, right from the Salaf, some of the Sahaba do transmit a difference of opinion. There are some hadith. The majority understanding of the Muslims is that in the afterlife it is eternal, although they disagreed on maybe the understanding of hell. That's a different matter because nobody really knows the afterlife. Anything that's mentioned in the Quran is simply a signifier and does not necessitate that the signified resembles that. So as Ibn Abbas said, it's only in words. But the eternality of hell, is it eternal? Most ulama do say yes. Some questioned it from the Salaf, including people later on like Ibn Taymiyyah, and said it wasn't. Ibn al-Qayyim clearly writes it wasn't. I think personally, I find their understanding interesting, and I do like that understanding, although I don't know, I haven't really thought too much on this topic, but there is that diversity, and I would like to highlight diversity, because it's transparency.
Do you watch Westworld?
I tried to watch it, but I mean...
The reality.
Is it? Okay, yeah.
I know you like your box series. Okay, last question for the day, if that's all right.
So based on if someone was to ask based on reason, why would God create hell in the first place? And also, how do the punishments of hell...
That is a good question, and responding to that, I would respond by like Fakhruddin al-Razi and other people said, that look, we the Muslims clearly believe, this is a clear belief of Muslims, by the way, right, across the board, generally speaking, that Allah does not need to put anybody in hell. He can put everybody in paradise. There is no disagreement that Allah can do that. And Allah Himself says, وَمَا يَفْعَلُ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ. What would Allah get out of punishing you? In shakartum, if only you show gratitude. Right. Now, the question here is that, you see, there's a difference, and the theologians have debated khulful wa'id. Allah said He would punish people, but can He go against this? And they said that Allah can go against it, because khulful wa'id is not like khulful wa'ad. Like breaking a promise is not the same as foregoing a threat. And they said foregoing a threat is noble. Then the question would be, why would God mention these things? Maybe because it's the nature of human beings that they sometimes need to be between like hope and a bit of intimidation or something. Maybe, I don't know. Look, the afterlife is something we don't know.
It's true.
All we know is this world. As far as we're concerned, Allah constantly reiterates everywhere. People say Allah punishes, Allah does this as well, Allah. And hence, Ibn Arabi, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, the Sufi, his understanding was azab was from the words azb, about it being sweet. But it was like something, and he came out with a different interpretation of the hell being some kind of deprivation. And Ibn Rushd, who's also from the mainstream Muslims, a great thinker from Muslim Spain, was that it was a kind of distancing from God. But the point is, here, what I'm trying to say is, what is it? We don't know. Like, we can speculate, but that's all it will be.
And I heard Sheikh Hamza Yusuf mentions Ibn Arabi as well. And I heard in one of his lectures that he said Ibn Arabi said the majority of people will be happy in the next life. And that was from...
Because Allah's always saying Rahman, Rahim, Rahman, Rahim, Rahman, Rahim. But it's the first thing we forget.
Yeah.
And we say, yeah, but He punishes.
Off with the head, off with the head. Sometimes you know.
Yep. What's? Say that again, sorry. You see, the question is, you get certain hadith where the Prophet is told, where the Prophet says, he's having a discussion with one of the companions, and the companion says, should I go and tell people this, that basically it's all good. And the Prophet says, no. Like people will just get, like meaning that you're just going to change people's understanding. Like, let people just get on with life.
Yes.
Like let them just be this. Look, Islam came, as Ibn Rushd says, that look, Islam came for the whole of mankind, and amongst them there will be certain people who are like great thinkers. Those people will attain certain levels that most of mankind won't. So Islam would encapsulate everybody. Like for those at the, let's say the lower levels, if we want to call it the lower levels, or this end of the spectrum, they will just be into the rituals, and that's enough for them. They will just do their work, survive, do this, get on with life, and just pray and whatever. But those, as they move on, would ponder more. But at least this way Allah can address everybody without just addressing an elite. Do you understand? That's what... Yeah, sorry.
Just to elaborate on the other question, the second question. You mentioned certain stages of studies that you started with Arabic. But if somebody had, for example, studied the Hadith or something...
Oh, you've done that? Alright. We have a scholar in our midst.
That's why the hard questions are
That's why trying to catch me out. Alright guys, yeah, that's...
Who are you working for?
That's very good, brother.
He's gone red. You're going red, boy.
So we have Maulana, can I take your name, who's attended my class? Deviant. Let his madrasa know they want to revoke that ijazah.
Did Yasir Hanif send you?
Yes. No, sorry. Sorry for putting you on the spot. I'll send it afterwards to your madrasas. Yeah.
Sorry, the question was, so from the contemporaries of Imam Bukhari, if it was people who, because you mentioned the isnad, after the isnad reason as your first other thing that has to be checked.
No, I said that isnad is like entry level. So it doesn't even enter the discussion until the hadith generally, okay, you've accepted it through this measure. Now, once it's in the discussion, we will check that, does it weigh up against these three?
Obviously, Imam Bukhari generally doesn't have that principle.
He doesn't. No, generally, no.
From his contemporaries, who should we study, which books from that time, or maybe before that time?
What do you mean as collection? But what was, you see, Bukhari is like a reservoir of hadith, yeah. It's like an encyclopedia, like it's a hadith collection. So it's a resource that we've got. Other muhaddithin have got others like Abu Dawood and all these people, they've got their books of hadith. The question is, how did Imam Bukhari think from his chapter headings? His understanding seems a bit different. But I'm not really sure if, when you're saying what are the books, I don't think there's a perfect book per se, that hadith book. But people were critical of Bukhari as well, his contemporaries too. People like Abu Zur'a al-Razi, people like Abu Hatim al-Razi. In fact, they wrote a refutation against his thing. And they were great. In fact, Abu Zur'a al-Razi was considered a greater muhaddith than Bukhari. Wow. Although he didn't actually compile hadith like Bukhari did, but he was considered a great hadith scholar.
Brother, what we're going to do, I'm going to let you have a discussion with Mufti afterwards. Just I'm conscious that this is going worldwide, Titans TV, yeah? And there's some people that might be lost in some of the technicalities.
Sure.
So we're going to get a very Gabs asks tough questions. Gabs is known from Speaker's Corner.
Oh, are you from Speaker's Corner?
He's a legend of Speaker's Corner, and he puts Muslims on the spot. So here we go.
Damn.
Get it in, Gabs. Get it in. Hey, we hear it's called Medicine Man.
Medicine Man.
Because he gives Muslims medicine.
Oh, damn.
Oh, man.
Whereabouts of Allah.
Okay. So, they, talking about if Allah exists within time, space,
okay,
or outside. So I wanted to get your understanding of if Allah does exist in time and space, or is he outside?
Space-time and stuff like that. It's an interesting... So the question is, if Allah exists, where does He exist? Is it within the space-time continuum, or is it outside? Look, the truth is, as Ibn Abi Zayd, who was a great Maliki scholar, known as Young Malik, writes in his early, what is called just the letter really, the Risala, it begins it with some beliefs, and he says that we will never comprehend, truly speaking, God. So I think anything we say is just our limited kind of understanding. The truth is, look, we never really know God. In the Quran, Allah doesn't really try to engage people in that way, to try to get to know Him in that kind of like very technical sense. In some verses, He's saying things like, look, God is always with you wherever you go. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. In some verses, Allah is saying Allah is transcendent from creation. He's transcendent from what you're ascribing to Him. He's transcendent. Then the scholars later on, as they got kind of into that theological philosophy, came up with their kind of theories that, look, if He's here, then oh my God, then He's part of creation. Then if He's part of creation, oh my God, then that's pantheism. Then this religion could also be true, and that definitely can't be true. So we've got to reject that. So let's go with this. And then some said, no, He's anthropomorphic. He's got body parts, and He sits on a throne. And then others said, oh, He's got like this and that. And this is just really nothing but just shots in the dark. That's all it is. Anything and everything. And what does Allah say? That that He is above amma yasifun. That ta'ala Allah amma yasifun. Allah is transcendent from how they describe Him. That He is not really, like we can never really understand that laysa kamithlihi shay. Like Allah just says, look, it's nothing that you can truly conceptualize that will understand God. Yeah. But we will have some ways. Look, I call these, I've got a theory which I call kind of like mood positions, that these are in the Quran. Allah uses these in addressing people. So sometimes you will need it as a near. Like when Allah is saying, look, He's with you. He's everywhere. People will say, like sometimes you will be in that state of mind that you need that understanding. Sometimes you will be thinking differently, so you don't need that understanding. So these are kind of mental mood positions that are used. And I think the problem with what some Muslim scholars have done sometimes is locked it off as this is how God is. And it's almost, I find it arrogant that you're dictating onto something that you're saying is so sublime and so beyond description. And you're doing it in such an arrogant way. And really, this is not God's journey to us, it's our journey to God.
Right.
So, yeah. This is a question I was asked quickly. This is another question I have as well. When a Muslim brother is asked to say that, they believe Allah is one.
Yeah.
Now, going back to what you just said, that one that we understand, we know one is that. There's one God there, or this is one camera. So when Allah was saying that He is one, is Allah's one the same one as we understand, or is His one could be many?
Like as in many gods.
As in many, because like you said, the one that we understand, the human, see the human.
Yeah.
But Allah's one is not going to be the same as ours.
I think that's a good question. I think generally, you see, it's interesting because even a lot of polytheism as well. Because the question is when God says He's one, do we truly understand that one? Can it not be like a kind of diversified one or something like this? I think that what it's saying, in essence, is that this Creator isn't, because when the Quran came to address people, who did it come to address? It came to address people that were kind of worshipping little statues. They were drenched in superstition. Oh my God, the curse of that thing is on me. Oh my God, my whole life will be ruined because the God of thunder is upset with me, or the God of this is like this. I'll never get crops, or I'll never get... This world that was plunged into deep superstition. Islam came to kind of break these bonds. In essence, what it came to do. And what it was teaching is that God is by one, like this unified creator. It's not this, what you're thinking. The Arabs, I think generally, and people understood one as a sole entity, whatever that entity is. Like as in, here's a different God fighting that God, and there's like you had in some of these mythologies, for example, Thor and these other kind of different gods, and he's a God running away from this God and so on. It came to kind of debunk that. In that sense, I think the understanding of Islam generally would be clear as in one. Now, this is a different discussion. Is that one, are we at one with that one?
Wow.
This is a different discussion. Wow. And I think most Muslims didn't take that route. Most Muslims kind of felt that God is transcendent from the time-space continuum. And that is the predominant, overwhelming view of most Muslims worldwide. There has been some Muslims like Ibn Arabi, Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, and these kind of scholars who felt that there was maybe the presence of God permeated everything. And I think, you know, he was speaking from a different angle. I think Muslims hated on him for no kind of. I think he wasn't trying to, because it's interesting that you see polytheism, like let's say Hinduism. People give that as an example of idolatry, but even in essence, they just believe in Paramatma, the one great Atma, the living thing, and Brahma, the one. But these demigods serve functions. And in some way, I think human beings find the true oneness of God a great challenge. Hence, even Muslims and Christians later on just went to give what was a demigod role to saints. And it became this kind of, because it was difficult to escape this kind of, because if there was just this one who's transcendent, why does he care about me? Became the issue. Like he's too grand and too huge and too about me, but I've got the patron saint of this to watch over me. So it became, not in the same way, but one could argue a modified version of that polytheism. Because I've said this in the past, because I think people definitely struggled with this true oneness, this unified sense.
I'm going to send you something because he's done a lot. I'm going to go to Kalam and then Rashad, you know, and then Wasim will be the last question. Literally, I know you've done really well.
No, don't worry about it, people. Say that again. I think we've got something planned already, so, but yeah, shukran.
Okay, as ambassadors of Islam,
okay.
I'm talking about Dais and everybody else, what can we do, even people in the media, such as myself, what can we do to break the stigma of Islam? So far in the media, there is a lot of bad.
There is a lot of bad.
A lot of non-Muslims are becoming much more aware of Islam.
Yeah.
And they're not aware of Islam from a very sincere point of view.
Of course.
They're aware of Islam from the point of view that they attack it. You see what I'm saying? They're looking at polemic sites and whatever else there is to find the faults and the flaws in Islam. So what can we do as ambassadors of Islam to push forward a better narrative? How can we outreach to those individuals or to communities who don't know Islam, fully? How can we change?
Great question.
I think that's a good question. Just for people, what can people who are being ambassadors of Islam do to improve the image of Islam? You see, I would like to say that first of all, I think one of the things, ironically, is people need to stop doing da'wah. Honestly. Because I think this da'wah scene has messed up Islam. I seriously think that the good that they may be doing here and there is so disproportionately outweighed by the harm that I can't stand these kind of these dawah things that are going on. If it was up to me, they would see what a tyrant is like. If I was in control, these things would be the first to be banned. Right, so that's a joke. I know people are going to be now taking that out of context. But look, I would say if anything, we need to be human beings. This is what we need. This is what will reconnect people to the faith. Yes. Look, the question is the question comes, what can Islam do for me? Not as a Muslim, but for a person like a non-Muslim, what does Islam have to offer? This is a very deep question, because I've asked this to people. We have no answers. People say, oh, it can give you a morality system. What are you on about? Morality system. It doesn't give no morality system. And human beings have arrived at arguably much more enhanced humanistic morality systems, which I would argue that the Sharia equally argues for. But
complete way of life. Go on.
You know, this thing, complete way of life, what does that even mean?
Yeah. What does
the Prophet never said to anybody like this, Islam is a complete way of life, complete way of life. What was this? This is a modern Muslim reaction to modernity.
Marxist Muslim.
So when the colonial kind of powers were introducing modernity to the Muslim world, Muslims were reacting, and they needed something to react with. So what they started to do was dig deeper into certain fundamentals. And they started to say, don't listen to their ways. Because look, prior to the Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution as well, the world as a whole was pretty much like a level plane. So you could be a Christian in Europe, you could be a non-Muslim, or you could be a Muslim. Despite your religion, life didn't vary too much. And way of looking at the world didn't vary too much. Like you thought, okay, there's going to be a hell, there's going to be a heaven, we should be, okay, this is right, wrong. Like the way you looked at the world, and even one could argue your way of dressing, your way of thinking, they varied, but there wasn't massive differences throughout the world. You had a different religion, but you were still similar. With the Industrial Revolution, followed on by, which was obviously also tied into like the scientific revolution and modernity coming along on the scene. The European and these they offered a different way of life almost, like a different way of thinking, like we don't need religion, we don't need this, there was these revolutions, we've got a democracy, we've got this, democracy was old, it wasn't something new, the Greeks had it ages ago, but the point is they came with something to offer, a menu. Now I've got a menu. Now they also came with power and strength. This is something you can't undermine. Now they came and took over a huge part of the world, committed atrocities, blind atrocities. Nobody can justify those atrocities. And there ought to be reparations, but that's a different discussion. But the thing is, look, when they did this, they also tried to break down the religious systems that were there. So they attacked, criticized, and they brought a different way of life. Muslims reacted. Rightly so, you would react. Now they needed to differentiate between the other. So the solution they brought was, look, don't look at these people. We've got a way of life. So the question then was, okay, what's our way of life? So here they had to then invent things. So the first thing, what's the obvious? See, everybody goes with the obvious. So the obvious thing is clothing. Because this is the easiest and most visible. When you want, look, it's a tactic. When you want something, you got to show visibility. Show you're doing. Hitler, when he took over, came to power, one of the first things, let's build roads. It's a practical thing. Yeah. People see the change. Yes. They see things, they believe you. All right, he is bringing about something. I see it. Muslims reinforce certain things. Okay, language. We don't speak English. We dress like this. We grow beards. I suppose back then people had beards as well. Non-Muslims had beards. But they started to reinforce the superficial. But people started to say, well, what else is our way of life? Oh, well, when we go to sleep, we sleep on a particular angle. They just started to invent things, take things from certain things and fill in gaps. It's I've got a menu. Okay, what's on the menu? Damn, we better make some stuff up now to put on this menu, because people need a full menu now. So this way of life thing is very deceptive. Nobody in the past used to say that. There's no hadith that taught, the Prophet never taught that, this is a way. He just said, look, just be. Kunu ibadallah, be the servants of Allah as brothers. Just be who you are. When the Prophet came, look, here's something interesting. The Prophet came to Medina. There was hostility. There was much hostility because he's a new person, he's coming in, he's got a lot of attention. People are kind of there's a lot of hidden hostility as well. People are kind of harboring hate against the Prophet, harboring resentment. One of the first things the Prophet does is makes an agreement with the Jews and other neighboring non-Muslim tribes and says, Nahnu ummatun wahida. Let's get one thing clear. We are one nation, all of us. One thing, the first thing the Prophet gets. And then somebody comes to him. They ask him in the hadith, what should we do? What do you want me to do? We're new here, Islam. Think about it. What would people say today? I'll tell you what they'll say. Set up a stall and give da'wah and give preach and let everybody know that there's one God. And what did the Prophet say? Look at what the Prophet said. He said, Afshu salam. He said, whoever you see, spread peace. Say a nice word to them. Then, he didn't stop there. You see, that's the kind of character. But people need more than character. They need you to live that character, personify. So he said, وَأَطْعِمُ الطَّعَامِ. Feed people.
Wow.
مَنْ عَرَفْتَ وَمَنْ لَمْ تَعْرِفْ. Those you know and those you don't know.
Those you don't.
Yeah, hey, listen, let me give you some food. Like, live. This was the message and the commandment of the Prophet when they were there. People, their hearts. See, what did the Prophet say? He said, give gifts, you will captivate the hearts of people. Like, people will kind of come to you. Like, this is how you would... A person, you know that person who came and he urinated in the mosque, famous story, and everybody's like, what the hell, let me kill. If that happened today, oh my God. It would be... we would see a lynching. But in the Prophet's mosque, the Prophet stops everybody. He himself goes and washes it.
Wow.
And then he calls the people. And look what the Prophet says. He says that tell them what you have to say. And the person was so shocked. He said, look, because he said to the Prophet, I don't know. I just thought, I just need to take a leak. And I just thought, oh, what the hell? Whilst they're just over there in that corner, I'll just take it here. And the Prophet said, look, this is a mosque, it's a place of worship. That's all. We give it that sanctity. And the person said, look, I don't know. He then said, this character, he said, I bear testimony that you are the messenger of Allah. Check this. The Prophet said, he took him out to the people, and he said to the people, he said, my similitude and your similitude, like the likes of me and the likes of you, is like that of a man who had a horse that went astray. Like it ran off wild. Or you could say he used wild beast. It could have been a camel as well. That kind of runs off wild. And he said, and the more people ran after it, the more it gave chase and ran away. So the more they tried to chase it, the faster it ran. And he said, that is like your similitude, and my similitude is like the owner who came and said, leave it alone. It is my horse, I know it best. He picked up some grass, and he said, and the horse came calmly to it. And so this being a decent human being should be agenda number one.
Yes.
Uncompromised. Uncompromised, I think. Like that.
I think that's going to be a wrap. We're going
right,
to
guys.
Let's go. Are we allowed to clap?
Hell yeah.
MashaAllah, brother. MashaAllah. Thank you, everyone watching online.
We live, baby. We live. All right.
It's been really nice. Thank you, Mufti. I know we've been all
most
going over the top.
Most welcome, inshallah.
Hopefully, we're looking to change. Literally, these little things now go worldwide.
Inshallah.
So, inshallah,
really appreciate
everyone that's come.
all coming on live as well, and all of you guys, man. Shukran, taking your time out. It's a Sunday. I know the holidays are over tomorrow, I think, for a lot of people. So still, you could just be chilling, taking a soak somewhere. Here you are. MashaAllah, so I appreciate that, man.
And
Shukran.
inshallah, we can have future events like this if you give me £3. Because I don't have to pay for this.
There's dealing going on here.
Big respect to Wasim for paying the cab fare for the
people, man. Tune in, inshallah, tomorrow night.
Everyone watching online.
All right, Monday nights with Mufti. Tomorrow night, people.
Yeah.
Over and out.